All right. So as people start trickling in, we have over 100 people in the room already right now. I just want to introduce everybody. This is an incredibly exciting topic, a topic very close to my heart, and I think the heart to all of our panelists and obviously all of our participants. It's about designing educational games in the age of AI, which is very quickly changing how games are designed, how they're conceived of, who can design them, what place they have in the classroom, and more. We have a short time today, so I just want to thank our sponsors quickly. Our sponsors, Tuck Advisors, is an M&A firm for EdTech, and Cooley, a fantastic law firm for all things education and EdTech. And I just want to jump in. Let's go to our first panel. Actually, wait, hold on. Before we do, let's introduce myself. So my name is Alex Sarlin. I am the co-founder of EdTech Insiders. It's an education technology community, a global community, people who are interested in education technology in all ways. Our co-host behind the scenes here is Walker McKenzie. He's a PM and visual storyteller at Discovery Education. He's also created educational games inside Fortnite and other big open worlds, so he loves this space. And Jen LaPaz is our operations lead. She has put a lot of this together, including these beautiful coins. And the other thing I want everybody to know, just logistically, there are going to be some breakout rooms throughout the day, throughout the webinar for a few of our really great products. If you hear about a product and you say, I want to know more about it, I want to talk to the team, you can jump into those breakout rooms. You can go in and out at any time. You should be able to find that under breakout rooms at the bottom of your screen. And just trying to replicate a little of that feeling of, of a conference, of booths, of going up and talking to panelists afterwards. And I really encourage you to do that because people are doing incredibly interesting work. Okay, with that, let us jump to our first all-star panel. I'm going to do a quick intro just based on their titles, but then I'm going to give each of them a chance to introduce themselves, and then we'll jump in. So we have Rebecca Kantar. She's the VP and Head of Education at Roblox. She's also an EdTech founder and has done incredibly interesting work in assessment and open world gaming. Dan White, absolute legend, 25 years, is that right? 20 years as a CEO of an educational game company, working through many different generations of different types of games. Lindsey was one of the rare EdTech founders who has created an online game that actually has proven results in the classroom. She has randomized, she has actual NSF funded results that this changes people's feelings about, especially about science. And Allison Matthews, head of Minecraft Education. Minecraft is the largest game in the world, and Minecraft Education has been in use all over the world with millions of students and teachers. Incredible group. With that, let me kick it. Let's do one more quick round of intros. Tell us about how you see your role. Let's go in the same order. Rebecca, let me start with you.
Sure. Thank you so much to everyone for having me. I'm Rebecca. I'm our VP of Education at Roblox, and formerly, as mentioned, founded Immersed, which was a high-stakes cognitive assessment company that focused on game-based and simulation-based assessment.
Hi, everybody. I'm CEO at Filament Games, Dan White. And yeah, basically our core methodology is we try to figure out how to make games so that if you get good at the game, you get good at something that matters in the real world. And yeah, we've been doing that for 2 decades.
And I'm Lindsey Tropf with Immersed Games. Our game is called Title Online, and we do problem-based learning in an MMORPG style video game, focused mostly on science. And now we've also been building out in math.
And hey, everybody, my name is Allison Matthews. I'm the head of Minecraft Education, which is part of Mojang Studios at Microsoft. I've been in the studio for 7 years after being with Microsoft for a long time, and we see Minecraft Education as core to the studio's mission to build a better world through the power of play.
Fantastic. And thank you for the brief but comprehensive, cohesive intros. Let me kick off with a little bit of a round panel. We're all all of you have worked in open world gaming. That's what Minecraft is. That's what Roblox is, open world with user generated content. What do you think are unique elements of open world gaming that make them particularly powerful for education and learning purposes? Let me actually kick it off with you, Lindsey. Tell us about open world gaming from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective would definitely be focused in what we've built with Title Online, and we really focus in problem-based learning within this context. Oftentimes when I'm talking to teachers, I tell them that we don't use a video game just because games are cool and snazzy and kids love them, although that is extremely helpful. We use a video game to set up kind of a context and use the immersion of the open world game to have problems that are authentic, kind of opportunities for students to explore and learn. So if we're going to learn about ecology, We are not just going to go read about it. We're going to figure out why animals at the top of the food chain are getting sick and dying in the ocean, or shrink down to ant size and investigate deaths. The benefit of the open world game here is really like one, intrinsic motivation. Students tell us one of the top reasons they like to play is the exploration, the learning itself within the game. So you get a lot of that in. Also, the scope we can do. We've been building this out over a few years and adding content. So rather than having kind of a linear type of experience, we're able to have a lot of overlapping stories that educators can use in any order they want in order to jump in and be able to do these types of problem-based learnings across the game, across pretty much unlimited topics that we can keep building and adding out.
Yeah, and that idea of, expanded online world where you can make choices, follow different quests, side quests, all of that world is so familiar to gamers, but has really not something we see. That kind of freedom is something we don't often see in education. Rebecca, let me pass it to you. What do you think is unique about open world gaming?
Sure. I think building on what Lindsey said, the ability to drop students right into the deeper and more challenging realms of problem solving, creative thinking, reasoning, understanding and using evidence. I like that instead of having to teach a ream of content and then being able to access some of those skills perhaps in the background, we're really able to drop kids in, quickly get them up to speed on a novel problem solving or creative opportunity, and then watch in the foreground as they make their way through those novel environments and hopefully practice some far transfer learning in the process from things they've encountered in other mediums throughout school and in informal learning contexts.
Yeah, let me jump to you, Allison. Transfer is such an interesting aspect of gaming and of open world gaming because you're actually in a space and then you find yourself in a real space in real life and you have to recognize signs of when to use what kind of skill. How do you think about open world gaming from Minecraft perspective?
Yeah, so very similar to what both Rebecca and Lindsey said. So Minecraft is a limitless virtual world where you can create anything you can imagine just by placing and breaking blocks. So this powers what can be a really transformational learning platform. So students can build skills on topics ranging from math and computer science to history and culture. And like Lindsey said, when you introduce a complex topic to a student in an immersive 3D world, it makes hands-on topics or challenging topics easier to understand because you can really manipulate them in 3D. So it also empowers all kinds of different types of learning experiences. So we think of learning experiences in Minecraft in a few different categories. So we've got contained lessons where a creator or a teacher can go in and they can create sort of a contained experience that lines to a learning objective that they're trying to land. We also really see a lot of build challenge use. So when you go into an open world, giving students a prompt of something that they need to go achieve in that space. And so when they're in that space with a prompt, then they are working their skills like problem solving and collaboration and resilience and critical thinking in a really sort of dynamic way.
Yeah, Dan, I'd love to hear you build on that idea of freedom, but then the guidance, right? You have an open world, but somebody's saying, hey, you might want to figure this thing out, or you might want to explore this part of it, or try to solve this problem, or create this, repair your ship. How do you think about it when you're thinking about open world gaming and you're always thinking about education?
Yeah, I mean, everybody's touched on the major hallmarks of open world spaces, the immersion, which presumably increases engagement and ostensibly leads to better learning outcomes. The player agency, which I would say is number one, because I think that open worlds at first give they impart a sense of player agency by having an open world 3D environment, but I think ultimately the actual 3D space fades into the background from a cognitive perspective, and the player is engaged in a mental space of like, what sorts of interesting choices can I make inside of this 3D environment? Not just can I, go north versus south. And that's where I think open worlds have the most potential to sort of create learning opportunities that look like the types of problems that players are going to be solving in the real world, which is obviously open in terms of being an actual 3D environment where we can go wherever we want, when we want. But that's not what makes it interesting. What makes it interesting is that we have agency to decide what to do and how to do it. And I think to the extent that open world can become a proxy for that type of cognition, it has a really huge opportunity to be a powerful learning tool. And then I also wanted to, just mention that this is not always the case, but often the case with open world games is that they are also multiplayer, which of course creates opportunities for communication and collaboration, which are skills unto themselves that are really important.
That's a perfect segue. So, I mean, that multiplayer idea, the idea that you're in a world with other people, with other students, with other players, you have to adapt, deal with complexity. Begs this question of durable skills. And I know this is something that you, Rebecca and Allison, are particularly passionate about, and you work in these enormous worlds. Skills like adaptability, dealing with ambiguity, you've all talked about, working with tools, seem like a really great match for open world platforms. Can you tell us a little bit about how both of you, and I'll start with you, Rebecca, how both of you think about how AI and open worlds can actually change what people are learning from, domain knowledge to durable skills?
I think as we see more and more AI tools that can be strung together to achieve whatever folks can imagine, whether that's building a full video game or interacting with a lesson plan, responding to a bigger challenge from an educator, let's say by marshaling many tools available, we just see a continued over-indexing on a lot of these higher order thinking skills and social emotional skills that folks have been discussing so far on this panel. And I think what's special about an open world environment is we have the opportunity not only to understand how kids choose to develop new experiences or build for those platforms in those places using all of the professional grade tools available to them, but we also have an opportunity when creators set up this chance to be so, to see kids in an experience in a meta way, leveraging whatever generative AI options are provided in that experience as a lens into how they're practicing that more abstract set of durable thinking skills, right? So where do they choose to start? How do they prompt? How do they respond to what's generated? How do they understand feedback from early user testing and then adapt? Do they create simulated users to partake in their testing? Thinking about the full concert of available options and tools and upping our expectations for how students bring those all together, what they imagine for themselves, and how they evaluate the quality of what they're building is where I see our field needing to move in the future if we want to make sure that our students are ready for what will absolutely be a competitive and in some aspects zero-sum future in some of these areas of expertise and skill that right now AI is already outpacing or is on track to outpace in the future.
Yeah, and I want to kick it to you, Allison. One thing just to call out there is AI is so good at taking things that we didn't think of in the past as data and then making them into data because it actually has the power to crunch them and make sense of them. Open worlds are an amazing example of that. Like you said, what do you do in the world? Who do you talk? Did you talk to people before, pursuing an idea? Did you try things? Did you collaborate? We actually have so much data about second by second what people are doing in open worlds. It becomes this incredible repository for research about what they're doing, and you can put together reports. Allison, how do you think about durable skills in the Minecraft universe?
Yeah, it's such an interesting time with technology advancing so quickly. Like I can just say, like as a Microsoft employee, even every time I get used to one set of AI tools we have to work with, then they change and they evolve and they grow and they're more powerful, and then it takes time to understand them again. And so thinking about the pace of change in this world, that's where we think about these durable skills, about the need to really empower young people to be able to deal with ambiguity and change. So like bringing it back to our mission that would then drive our priorities here. So our mission is to inspire young people with a passion for learning that will empower them throughout their lives. So that's where the game and the fun and the open world and creativity comes in. And then in terms of implementing AI, we're thinking about it in 3 different ways. So first, how can we empower our team and our creator partners to save time and build even cooler things? And I can give you an example on that. How can we save teachers time? So what tools can we give to teachers to make it easier for them to know what lessons they want to teach in Minecraft? And then the third piece is educating students on like what AI is, how to recognize it in their daily lives, and then importantly, giving them opportunities to practice critical thinking as they navigate the imperfections of AI. So giving you a couple examples. So I just returned from Rome, where I launched a really cool project in Minecraft, where we worked with a creator partner to recreate St. Peter's Basilica in Minecraft. The way that was done was using drones and cameras that took 400,000 pictures inside and outside of St. Peter's, and then turned it into an AI-driven digital twin. We then were able to take that digital twin and recreate St. Peter's Basilica in Minecraft. That's something that would have taken years if we had to do it without the power of AI. So that's like a real accelerator. We also have a tool for teachers called Lesson Crafter. And basically that's just teachers can enter a prompt on what they want to teach students. And then with AI, it can generate really super quickly 3 potential lessons that they could deliver in the game. And then for students on like what is AI, how to use it in their lives, we're thinking about that in terms of AI foundation. So we're starting with basically a video series on that my mom could understand or that my kindergarten niece could understand on basically recognizing AI and then thinking about how they can use it.
So those of us, it's incredibly exciting, and the idea of taking real world environments, being able to recreate them, has been, I think, in some ways, the bread and butter of Minecraft. It's something that people have tried to do on their own for a while. Now with AI and collaborative tools, I mean, I can imagine, a whole city recreated in Minecraft sometime soon, especially with AI enhancements. So, Lindsey and Dan, I want to go to you. You both do really interesting things with problem-based learning, and you also both have followed the education gaming world for a while back in River City. Like universities have tried to create these interactive experiences to make games and gaming more of a viable solution for a long time, but it's just been hard to create good experiences because it's been so expensive. Now you can create really good games that are an authentic alternative to drill and practice regular old classroom worlds. It's a really amazing moment. So how do you think that the AI tooling that now exists is going to change the economics of this world so that, Lindsey, for example, you can create a really beautiful, sustainable, large online world at a fraction of the cost as you would have, 10 years ago? Let me start with you, Lindsey, and then Dan, I'd love to hear your take as well.
Yeah, I mean, really our focus here has been that, we create problem-based learning. And as you said, it has been more expensive to do these type of bespoke experiences. We use our own proprietary content authoring studio in-house that we've designed that lets us lay all these out, has kind of our pedagogical methodology built into it. Even then, though, it is still a lot more time consuming to make this type of learning than like people who are loading up a bunch of problems and practice experiences and things in a game. So we're working right now on taking that, making it available to third parties to start using that tool set to create their own content with kind of pedagogical guardrails around the process. And then, of course, using AI kind of within that system. So rather than trying to just let it go free on everything, we're thinking more of a human in the loop model with the framework that we've designed based on pedagogical best practices that would help you, say, brainstorm the real world scenarios. We can feed a lot and train, the model on what good ones look like, how to lay out the game mechanics, and even filling in the game mechanics themselves. So for example, I am great at instruction. I am not a very good creative writer. So if I try to do branching dialogue in my game quest, it is cheesy and terrible. And so the idea that I can have the AI know the personality of the NPC, feed that in, then I can just check it and do that means I can make this so much more feasible and more democratized that people will be able to start making these learning experiences from smaller teams, people who don't have this huge complete skill set and things like that. So that's kind of the direction we're working right now and the plans that we're working on. Not control some of the just like totally free form ideas. I still think, there's a lot of ethics and philosophy behind what we teach and how we teach it. That will be a little while before we get that into our models. But yeah, that's kind of the direction we're working on.
And that concept of pedagogical guardrails inside AI tooling for game development is very exciting. It's something that I think the whole field could really use, and it's just a fascinating way to look at it. And yeah, non-player characters created or manned by AI. There's a whole company called InWorld that does nothing but that. It changes the game as well because you can actually have a dynamic game. All these AI characters, you talk to them and they actually respond as characters, just like a chatbot. Dan, what about you? How do you think this is all changing?
Yeah, so from my perspective, we need project or problem-based learning games for literally every class and every learning objective. And Filament's been at this for over 2 decades. We've made over 400 games at this point. And I would say we've probably covered 0.0001% of the total amount of content that ultimately needs to be generated. So you've got two options. Either you have to lower the quality of the content or you have to make it faster. So AI will help us with the latter. So project or problem-based learning games, like Lindsey said, are really expensive to make compared to drill and practice because they involve these deep systems or simulations at the core. So for example, we have a game called Roboco, which is a robotics game, which is essentially a virtual robotics toolkit where you can build any kind of robot you can imagine. It's a lot harder than making a quiz with nice graphics. So in a good problem-based learning game, one metric, one sort of axiom I like to apply or litmus test is, do any two of the solutions the different students come up with look the same? If the answer is yes, then you're not necessarily creating a deep or rich enough simulation environment. So for example, in Roboco, if I ask students to build a robot to walk up stairs and I have a class of 20 students, I'm going to see 20 different solutions. I'm going to see 20 different robots climbing upstairs in different ways. Actually, probably half of them will be falling off the stairs and floundering around on the ground, but that's part of the learning process. So I think, yeah, so AI will dramatically reduce the cost of developing these types of games. It already has started to. Which is, in my mind, a have our cake and eat it too kind of scenario where we get to have that complete content coverage and still have these deep and rich interactive problem spaces. One other thing I wanted to mention is that there's another challenge besides scale with problem-based learning games, and that is complexity. So let's say we solve the problem of having a problem-based learning game for every single course and every single concept. You still have what we see when we put students in game spaces like Roboco is they need a lot more scaffolding and support and more than the teacher alone can provide. So the idea of also embedding AI agents into these games that can help support the learners and sort of scaffold them toward navigating on the problem, on their solutions to the problems and iterating on their designs, et cetera, I think is really important. And then I also think it'd be cool to have AI agents that can assist teachers with the assessment on the other side, because assessing problem-based or open world games is notoriously difficult. So imagine a world where teachers... What's that?
Är du säker? Om du mår illa...
Oh,
sorry.
Where teachers can dialogue with like a chatbot, for example, about how different students went about solving the problems.
Yeah, I mean, I think anybody who's sort of started a commercial online world game, you land in the world and there's some non-player character standing there saying, welcome, let me show you around, and it's totally standardized and there's no adaptability in this. You can't ask them anything. They're just going to give you your first quest. It's such a different world, and where you can land in a new world and you can have AI agents show you around, ask you questions, make sense. You can even control them. Rebecca, this is actually something I've heard you talk about that's really interesting. The idea of teaching students to use AI tools and help them become, architects of AI, putting together different AI tooling. I feel like games could be an amazing playground for that. You could have 5 different AI agents and that's your team, and you work with them and have them create, a boat and sail it. I mean, tell us how you think about it. How can students prepare to use AI inside these open worlds?
Sure. And I would build on some of what Dan shared. I think the opportunity assessment, I'm just going to mute whoever that is. I think the opportunity for building assessment into these game loops and considering how you evaluate students' work product greatly expands the aperture of complexity of problem solving space and solution type that we're able to offer to students and then evaluate when they create those different outputs. So I think that's a huge opportunity. I think different AI tools are required for evaluating how students go about creating things within an experience versus outside of just a particular platform's experience or game on a platform. So I would just call out, Roblox's new AI cube model, our foundational AI model that goes from text to 3D generation, which if you haven't checked it out, you should, it's very cool. But I think that interplaying with Blender and interplaying with different audio tools that students might be using, thinking about materials and shaders and special effects and how they want to bring to life whole worlds is going to require more than any one platform offers in its tooling at this time. And it's going to require a lot of specialized humans still who understand how to take something from 80th percentile to 100th percentile. And I just want to double down still on what Dan mentioned, because I think there's two potential pitfalls that our field often ends up continuing, no matter how many years I've been exposed to this industry and I've seen different tools come and go. I think the first is mistaking complication for complexity in early game design stages, right? So when you're trying to imagine degrees of autonomy or richness in problem solving spaces, I think a lot of teams have a tendency to move on from mapping learning standards or pedagogy, in Lindsey's case, thinking about how to move from that goal of what am I trying to teach or what am I trying to assess to what's the core game design loop and how does it work. I think we often end up with kind of simplistic systems and then layer in pets or layer in a points-based system or layer in a community health track system with a heart, a star, and a tree emoji. And it's not that those components can never be good, but they don't address an underlying flaw of a too simplistic open possibility space of the types of verbs students can execute in a game-based environment. So that would be kind of my top watch out for. I think the second one is it's tempting to think that all of these AI tools together, if students and particularly if game creators gain access to them, that these experiences are going to suddenly be the kind of deep and rich learning experiences that I can tell from listening to everyone on this panel we all have experience with, and that we have experience with folks struggling to deliver, right? Where we often get kind of obbies that have gamified elements as opposed to game-based deeper learning. The core limiting reagent, in my view, is the two humans who work together, one a learning science expert or an expert in a particular domain of study, and the other a game design expert. And those two folks being able to constantly be in tandem of what are we building and how is the core game loop we're building reinforcing the core learning we hope to achieve, and vice versa. And I think there's a great risk of folks, setting ChatGPT loose on game design and perhaps still missing the thread of how difficult and important that interplay and that mutual reinforcement is. So I would encourage students and educators to remember that level of abstract cognition and reasoning is still not replaced in any of the AI tooling we've seen to date. And I think it's among the most important ingredients for kids to master and for educators trying to provide experiences that teach those skills to include as they're creating whatever those opportunities are.
Yeah, that's amazing points. I want to do one little around the horn. I know we're almost out of time, but there's some really interesting questions in the chat about neurodiversity, visual impaired learners. We have people from all over the world. And Lindsey, can I throw this one to you quickly? I know I'm sure everybody has ideas about it, but how do you think this concept of education, immersive educational gaming, sort of fits into the world of neurodiversity and differences, learning differences?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully really perfectly. It obviously depends on the design of all of our products, but I think most of us would probably say that we designed for a universal design for learning approach, where a lot of those kind of supports are built right in. I know for our team, we, for instance, for cognitive reasons, make sure that there's not a high working memory load. The next objectives are on screen, things like that. Color blindness is probably built into most of our products. There's a lot of things we can all do to make things flexible, choices within the game, to customize settings, to track it. So I'm sure if you looked up any of our products and accessibility, you would find like big lists of the type of things we've done. More than that, having kind of different ways to demonstrate and engage with your knowledge in games can be really powerful. I'm thinking of a time that I finished up an NSF-funded study in a classroom in Florida, and one of the students who normally really struggled in school walked up to us and just let us know that she just felt really smart as she played the game and had solved some problems in this kind of different type of way than she normally is exposed to, where maybe it was less reliant on being able to read for people that have reading disabilities and things like that. I'll also say we're working right now on co-designing with blind students as well on how to make the game fully functional there and interesting and still enjoyable. So there's a lot of movement in our space around accessibility from kind of all angles of that.
Spectacular. Amazing answer. So we're in our last minute. One thing that blew my mind recently, Microsoft Muse put out Microsoft put out a paper that basically says AI with enough training can actually generate game worlds in real time. So as you're walking, a new space opens up. There's just like a new type of thinking about AI game design I've never even thought about. Can I just get a one sentence response from each of you about how you react to that and what it makes you think as a game designer? Allison, let me start with you.
I would just say the Microsoft researchers do some really amazing things, and it's always fun to see the videos that they put out. I I would say that the research and the tools are rapidly evolving, and we at Minecraft are taking quite a bit more of a measured approach in incorporating these tools into learning environments because we want to make sure that we're grounded in safety and security and all of the things that young people need to be safe.
Fair, safe answer to a speculative question, but I get it. You're having it both ways, looking at the future, but being careful about rolling it out. Dan, how about you?
I think there will continue to be demand for what I consider a somewhat rarefied expertise, which is people who understand both good learning design and good game design. And I think those people will ultimately be still an important part of creating compelling and efficacious educational spaces. But for the time being, I think the most high quality spaces will still come from individual people as part of a team creating assets that then get compiled into a unique experience as opposed to something that's generated whole cloth by, say, for example, an individual or a small number of generalists working with tools that are able to generate entire games and then iterating in partnership with the AI on those games. The plus side, I think, there wasn't a period there, so this is still a sentence. That was a comma. The plus side, I think, of things moving in that direction, if and when we get there, is I love the idea of teachers and students being able to generate really high quality educational games as well.
Incredible, yeah. Rebecca, how about you?
I guess that my first response is that sounds like procedural generation 2.0. I'm here for it in the cases where good enough is good enough. I think there's always a risk of AI slop taking over everything, and that would be a real bummer. So I'm excited for human supervised expansion of that type of procedural generation with Gen AI in responsible lanes.
Similar to Rebecca, I'm not super interested in just generation of kind of random worlds versus the humans really having an impact. I do like that it at least is removing the barrier of creation on the 3D side for instructional designers and people who can make great experiences. So I was looking at the Roblox release and kind of keeping close attention to this. I want to build these things into our authoring tool because that is still the largest barrier for kind of democratizing access to this.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I imagine an AI agent that you say, I'm interested in this, and it goes, walk that way. Through that door, you're going to find whatever you just said, and you can go design it and play with it. And we're almost there. Incredible. Thank you so much for this amazing kickoff panel. We have Rebecca, VP and Head of Learning for Head of Education at Roblox, Dan White, CEO at Filament Games, Lindsey Tropf, CEO at Immersed Games, and Allison Matthews, Head of Minecraft Education, together representing millions and millions and millions of learners. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And we're going to now move on to our next panel. I know I'm not the best timekeeper in the world, but I'm going to try to keep us on. Thank you so much. This is amazing. And everybody who's watching, we will put out recordings as well as, of course, AI summaries and lists of resources curated by our incredible panel, because there is really amazing stuff happening in this case. If we can just jump to the next slide, and we will introduce our next amazing panel. We have Vadim Polikov. He's the CEO at Legends of Learning, which is a marketplace for educational gaming where game studios can create educational games and get them into the classroom. Brent Bushnell, founder of 2-Bit Circus and the 2-Bit Circus Foundation, which does incredible work with gaming in all different contexts. He will tell you more. And Skylar Scarlett, the founder and CEO at Game Class, which is working to create educational layers on top of commercial games, of any game you can think of. The breakout rooms, to question in the chat, breakout rooms are open throughout the webinar. They should be manned for as much time as possible, but basically, if you want to go in and find out more from Dan and his team at Filament Games, you can just go in right now, and the Filament Games room, there should be someone there to talk to you about it. I'd like to go around. I gave you the quick intro. Vadim, can you give us a little bit of a longer intro as the camera's coming on about what Legends of Learning is and how you've done educational gaming?
Sure. So very nice to be here. Thanks, Alex. Legends of Learning, like you said, is a marketplace of educational games. We're a game-based learning platform. And what we do is we take the curriculum and we chop it up into small pieces, usually at the standard level. And then we work with game studios around the world who then build a game that directly covers that one standard. So let's say a standard is how to add fractions, or a standard is photosynthesis. game studios will make a game that is usually 10 to 15 minutes long, and it directly covers that one standard. So one game equals one standard. And then those game studios are competing with other game studios that also have built, let's say, a photosynthesis game, and they're competing for the teacher's attention. And so then the teacher can choose whether to launch Game Studio A's photosynthesis game or Game Studio B's photosynthesis game. And as a result, you get this marketplace as the game studios are paid based on a revenue share allocated by playtime and ratings. So it's a large number of game studios on the platform. At this point, over 500 studios have built games on the platform, and we cover the full curriculum from kindergarten to 8th grade for math and science.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a really amazing model and obviously very relevant to AI. Brent, let's jump in with you. Two-Bit Circus is a complicated and exciting org. Tell us about what you've been doing.
Yeah, I've been running it now almost 15 years. It's really two parts. We make a bunch of our own games and exhibit those, in public venues. And then we have a whole nonprofit foundation using games and play to get kids excited about science and engineering. We deploy maker spaces. We upcycle clean waste that the kids can use in their projects. Professional development, and then STEAM carnivals, which is sort of like a full stack replacement for the science fair. Kids build their own games and then throw their own carnival. We've got one in Hawthorne actually Saturday. So I'm really excited about that in Los Angeles.
Yeah. And if you're in the Southern California, Two-Bit Circus Arcade is an incredible place in LA. And it basically was the pioneer of in-person escape rooms, which has now become a national trend, but they were way, way ahead of it. So, Skylar, tell us about Game Class, how you came up with it, and what does it do with games and education?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So Game Class lets educators and students transform any video game into an educational experience. So that means extra credit, homework assignments, lessons, courses, assessments. We can take Mario Kart, Animal Crossing, Halo, you name it, and we take recorded clips. We let the educators or we let the students create unbelievable educational experiences using their favorite video games.
Fantastic. All right, so let's jump in. The thinking behind this panel is that AI is completely changing the game for AI developers. We've seen Electronic Arts basically come out and say, AI is everything for us now. We're just going to use it for absolutely everything. We've seen the ability for people to just create, much smaller studios or even individuals to create pretty serious games. Let me start with you, Vadim. You've been doing this marketplace. You mentioned 500 studios. So you've had this front row seat to studios basically trying to decide, should I do an educational game or should I try to do an app store game? Should I do a mobile game? Should I do a casual game? How have they made that decision traditionally? And what do you think is changing right now with AI?
Yeah, it's a good question. The studios that are on our platform really range in size from solo developers to teams of 3 to 10, all the way up to studios that are 100-person studios and have, let's say, a development team that's in dry dock and needs some work. And so what we've seen is studios choose to work with Legends of Learning because for a few reasons. Number one, it's pretty guaranteed revenue for them compared to, let's say, the revenue that they might get on Roblox or other networks where winners can get lots of money, but most people get $0. Whereas in Legends of Learning, there's a pretty narrow range that people can get, and so it's somewhat good revenue for them. And it's also something that a lot of these teams are doing on the side as they're working on their passion project. Like they're gonna launch their awesome game on Steam, and they're all gonna become millionaires. But in the meantime, they have to pay the bills, and they could pay the bills by being the barista at the local coffee shop. They can use their technical skills to make a commercial for the local car dealership, or they can use their game development skills to make games that their kids will love because they're educational games. So a lot of these game studios are choosing to create games for Legends of Learning because it's a good revenue stream for them, and it uses the skills that they were going to need anyway for the big game that they're building together as a studio. Oh, Alex, you're muted.
Oh, I muted myself. I usually don't do that. Brent, let me ask you a similar question. You have developed your own games. You've also licensed many games for uses in your Steam carnivals or your arcade. How do you think? Do you feel the same way? Like, how do you think game studios are going to start to think differently about educational gaming as a viable money-making scheme, as well as a, keeping the lights on in their studio while they do the big Steam game?
I do, and I think there's really two parts there. One is around consumption, right? There are going to more places for the kids to be able to actually get access to this stuff at a real reasonable cost. And for the game makers, I love the Ubisoft example with Notre Dame. They Assassin's Creed. They have a full-time historian. They made sure that game was very accurate, and they also have great scans of Notre Dame. So much so that they used it as reference material to rebuild it after the fires. And then took that and turned it into an educational experience. Super expensive to bring a bunch of kids to Notre Dame. Much easier to bring Notre Dame to them in a virtual environment.
Right.
So I love the idea that game companies will be able to sort of extend their IP lots of different ways. It could be learning, could be therapy, could be fitness. The second you've got the tools to be able to do it faster, you get more done. My little brother is a game developer, and he doesn't write much code anymore. It's a lot of understanding the architecture, understanding the higher order concepts, and then ChatGPT is going to give you the implementation details. I just learned this new term, vibe coding.
Yep.
And I just love this idea of vibe coding. You don't need to code at all. If you just like I'm going to get lucky on Google. That you could do one prompt and have back the code that you need in order to implement what your desires. So I think we're going to see a lot of cool stuff.
It's almost like having a coding team. It's like you can point direction and think high level architecture, high level what you want to see, and the AI acting like a team of coders to actually write the code line by line can sort of replace that working. So Skylar, you come from a different lens in here, which I think is really valuable, right? You have, I think, have taken something that us in educational gaming have thought about for a long time, which is that people put a ton of money into commercial games. Games like Mario Kart and Animal Crossing that you mentioned from Nintendo cost a lot of money to make. They're tested like crazy, and we know and they're pre-proven. We know kids already love them. So I'm curious, do you see a world in which AI can help create educational versions of these games that are richer and richer and richer, where a kid could go home and say, I'm going to do my homework in Animal Crossing tonight instead of on paper. Obviously this is exactly what you're trying to build, but I'd love you to talk more broadly about how viable that becomes in this era.
Yeah, I absolutely see it. I think, like you said, you don't have to fight against someone, playing Animal Crossing. Like, it's hard to get them to do their homework, but their homework is Animal Crossing. It's a different story. So I feel like with AI, it's making everything so much easier. Even with us right now, we're already using it to come up with questions. It already knows what game you're using. The questions are amazing. They're really good multiple choice, true, false, and it's only going to get better. We're already reading video game clips, and it's incredibly accurate. It can see what's on the screen. It can see minor details already, and we're about to attach it to our editor. So really quickly, we can make these fun, exciting lessons. So I do think studios are going to see really quickly that video games are not just a hobby, which I think we all agree on, right? They're one of the greatest teaching tools in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I remember reading the James Paul G book, or I did my master's thesis on games and learning, and I had that sort of realization as a young person too, of like these experiences are so immersive and so exciting for young people, but they are actually educational, at least in their own way, or in ways, in durable skills types ways. That said, I've still been waiting for a while for the world that we are heading towards now, where they can also, if we want, address domain knowledge, and they can actually help kids get better grades in school. So Vadim, my question then is for you. Legends of Learning has this big marketplace of games. They're standards aligned, as you've mentioned. What do you do in your system to make sure that the content generated by studios or by AI is both fun and interesting for the students and fun to play, but also has educational value, that people come out of the games actually having learned something?
Yeah, so that's the core problem that we have to solve every day as a company. Because obviously you can make a game that's super fun but doesn't belong in the classroom. And you can also make a really boring interactive experience, which is basically just a digital textbook. So how do you get that balance right? the way that we've done it is kind of two mechanisms. One mechanism is that every game on our platform is rated by both teachers and students, kind of like your Rotten Tomatoes critics and user score. The teachers typically rate games based on how well aligned to the curriculum it is and how educational it is. And students obviously rate the game based on how much fun it is. So in order to be successful on our platform, you have to have both a high teacher score and a high student score. And the game studios have to balance that. So some games are a little bit higher in the teacher score, some games a little bit higher in the student score, but you can't just throw in a super fun game that doesn't align to the curriculum that teachers will score poorly. So that's one mechanism. The other mechanism is the market. We're constantly publishing new games to the platform. So we publish about 5 games a week to the platform, and we take down the same amount of games on a regular basis. So what we see is the quality of the games constantly improving as higher quality games replace lower quality games. And so we get feedback from teachers that say, okay, this game was good, but on level 3, it didn't teach the concept the way that it's expected to be taught in the classroom. That feedback goes to the game studio. They better change it, or else their game's going to be taken down and replaced with higher quality games. So we've definitely seen a big increase over time on quality, but it's because of this kind of like the regular marketplace mechanism combined with these 2 scores on every game.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, having multiple ways to evaluate an educational game seems incredibly important. I think that those of us who've been in this world for a while, which I know is all of you, and I think many of our audience members have always been sort of figuring out where is the place where the gaming world and the education world come together, right? How do we overlap them? Does the game world come into education? Does education go on top of a commercial game? And I think one area you sort of mentioned it a little bit just there is that's really interesting for AI is assessment through gaming, right? So Skylar, I want to throw this one to you. Game Class is creating, you mentioned multiple choice, different types of assessments, sort of classic assessments, literally inside games based on what you're doing in the game and connected to, where, like, literally what students are doing at that moment in the game. I'd love you to explain that a little bit and how that works. But then maybe zoom out a little bit about where you see this going in terms of how gamified, how assessment might actually happen in game rather than through, classic assessment types.
Yeah, I mean, I love talking about this because there is 2 mechanisms to game class, right? One, you're kind of a passenger, you're watching clips, you're interacting with like multiple choice and, shapes and stuff like that. But you can also be a driver. You can do assessments. And all this is educators can prompt a video game clip in like 90 seconds, give it instructions, ask them to demonstrate that they understood what you taught them in school this week. Did you understand the vocabulary you wanted you to use? Did you understand force in physics, right? And they can take a clip, a really popular video game, and now the students are the ones that are being asked to create. And you get to really see what's in their mind. When they have an editor and they're putting, overlays over a video game clip, magic happens. And you can see like we have so many analytics. We don't take any personal information, but we have a lot of analytics to see like what's working, what overlays are they using? Draw, text, shape. How much AI are they using, right? A little bit or a lot. And we do it really non-intrusively. So I love what we're doing with assessments because now you can turn any video game into an assessment, right? And you can find, if you find a student's favorite video game, game over. Maybe you couldn't reach them, but all of a sudden you find out their favorite mobile game or their favorite video game. Like, there's nothing better than that, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a way to instantly hook them and connect it to their experience in certain ways. And so let's go one layer deeper. And Brent, I'm going to ask you this, and Vadim, I think I'll ask you the same question as a follow-up. But, do you envision that we'll soon be at a point in human history, this has never happened before, where, a 3rd grade teacher can say, I want to teach pronouns this week, and it's part of my curriculum, it's my standard, and they can, and just by saying, I want to teach pronouns, and my kids are into Pokemon, or my kids are into racing, or my kids are into whatever they're into, you can get a game of that type that teaches exactly the content that you want to teach. Are we there already? Are we nearly there, or is that still speculative? Brent, let me start with you.
Man, I just love the sound of what you're talking about. And I think we I think we can get there. You know, IP considerations aside, you know, you know, obviously people want to be able to hear from the characters they love, so it would be wonderful to be able to unlock that capacity. You know, we're very project oriented in our stuff, and so I sort of love the idea of assessment baked into whatever it is that you're doing. So, you know, in Super Mario Brothers, you don't get to jump, you don't get to go to level 2 unless you can jump, you learn how to jump and you learn how to, you know, jump on Koopas. You know, these are sort of critical pieces of the game. You know, so the more these experiences can be baked into you know, the assessment is baked into the experience, you know, the project. You don't get to move to the next phase of the project if you don't understand the, you know, the fundamentals of this first pass. So I do think that we're going to get there. You know, I think it could be within a year. You know, I think we're moving fast.
It feels like we're close to that sort of mastery-based model. And Vadim, follow up. You know, you have, I'm sure, games on your platform right now that are for third grade teachers who want to teach the pronoun, you know, standard in their state. But are we in a world where that game could be adapted to a new topic or a different type of game?
So I think that I'm going to be a little bit more skeptical than maybe Brent was on this. If there's kind of two kinds of games that we see in our work. One is gamification, where the game is not really related to the standard that you're teaching. So, you know, you're racing, it's a racing game, and then all of a sudden a question pops up, or Mario jumps, and then a question pops up. Yeah, those kind of games can be adapted to any learning objective, any standard, because you can change the questions. And those games can be generated or will be, you know, right around the corner through AI. And the thing is that many products already offer those kind of games for free in their products because it's so easy to generate those games. But that's not what the market is asking for from what we see, and that's not where the learning games come from. In the last panel, you had some really high quality game studios on that spend a lot of time and effort building immersive experiences that directly teach through play. Those are the kind of experiences that an AI cannot generate today and would have trouble generating even in the future. So can the teacher say, hey, build me a racing game that you know, that tests a multiplication? Yeah, that can happen probably today or pretty close to today. It can happen on a lot of existing platforms that the teacher has access to. But if the teacher says, you know, build me a game where the student is in a pizza shop and has to do multiplying fractions in order to understand how much pizza to be delivered to every table, AI cannot do that in a great way, and certainly the game design will be kind of weird and off. And I don't think I think it's going to be a while, if ever, when AI can replace that kind of really high quality game design that the studios on our platform, and certainly the studios that you had on the prior call, have on their expertise.
I think that's a really important distinction you're making. I don't know I don't know if I understand if I have a name for that kind of game. Do you have a name for the kind of game where it's like?
Yeah, so it's the distinction between gamification and game-based learning, right? You gamification, you put a game like Element to a quiz, which is great. I mean, sometimes you just need to motivate kids in the classroom to do boring stuff like answer questions. And then I think game-based learning tends to be more on learning through play and through the game.
Right. It's embedded in the actual game rather than sort of a game template where the content can just be swapped out.
And every game on our platform, that's the instructional game, that's where most of the games are, they are directly related to the standard that they're teaching, so they cannot go to another standard. The only thing that can be reused, sometimes you get some characters that pop up in multiple games, but the actual game design cannot be reused because it's so directly related to the standard.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's that switch over from sort of templated gamified games to actually in-depth games that make sense, that feel like true games where the content is embedded rather than sort of a layer on top, feels like a huge shift to make. Let me ask you, Skylar, about this, because I think this is really an important part of the world. And then Brent, I'm going to go to you about what you said about Ubisoft earlier in Notre Dame. But, you know, Skylar, I think the question I have for you is, you are doing these things with Mario Kart, or, you know, on top of existing games with game clips and sort of being able to take games that students know and love, and then have educational experiences sort of built on top or within them. I am so curious if we're going to get to a world relatively soon where it just becomes so inexpensive through AI to sort of transform game content to whatever you want it to be, that it actually would make sense for Nintendo to say, you know what, let's hit these buttons here and do a decently educational version of Mario Kart that it at least is a template like the type but that you're talking about, Vadim, but maybe it's more interesting. Maybe you do pit stops in Mario Kart and you have to actually put together an engine, and then where they're going to teach an engine. Like, these are the things that you can actually do now, and they would never considered that. I mean, Nintendo's notoriously cheap studio, famously does not like spending money, but if it's something where you can enter a whole new market with AI, do you think they're going to do it?
So, my dev team will hate me for saying this, but on your question about AI, like I think we're 90 to 120 days away from doing what you're saying. But to Vadim's point, I'm way more of a fan of not just overlaying random stuff, like really using what exactly is happening in the clip. If Spider-Man swinging around, we talk about Spider-Man swinging. And I'm also way more a fan of students creating. So I do think the future game class is going to be, even when AI is involved, like you can't take away the aspect of creating or playing. And I also see, I love educational games that are not, they're not popular video games, because game class is a stepping stone. So what I found is a lot of people we're reaching are non-video game players, because they're more just learning. They're like, they don't play video games. All of a sudden they're seeing video games in a completely new light. It's not just a hobby. They're like, wow, these colors, these characters, this is awesome. One of my interns never played a video game in her life, was making Animal Crossing lessons with math and language arts. She ended up buying a Nintendo Switch and buying Animal Crossing because she thought the game was cute and she wanted to play it. That's powerful. So I think, a stepping stone is really powerful, right? I think what you do is you have something really accessible, gets people, comfortable with using video games educationally. And then they go, they go to Vadim, they go to Brent, and they do a lot more. They get more into it with the creating and stuff. So yeah, I do not think we're far away. I think we're really close to doing what you're saying. Now, is it going to be perfect at first? No way. Not at all. And I mean, we're working really hard on our editor to make sure that these, the AI, will be educational and not just random.
Yeah. Yeah, the economics of this are so interesting. Downloadable content is an interesting area for this, right? The idea of unlockable content. There's just so much interesting stuff in there. Brent, so question for you, and then we're going to do our little speed round. I know you guys started a little late, so we can go like a couple minutes past the hour. But you mentioned this Notre Dame example of Ubisoft spends all this money, scanning every element of Notre Dame, and then can take it and actually have the files, maybe put them out, maybe make them open source, or give them back to the French government, something like that. It begs a question, I think, about VR gaming, augmented reality gaming, extended reality gaming. It's something we're not talking about a lot today, but it is obviously such an interesting area of this, and something that's where the costs are also plummeting. The idea of so tell us about your vision of immersive gaming in education.
Yeah, gosh, thanks for bringing that up. I'm just totally obsessed. I've been building a VR over a decade, and VR has a fundamental Achilles heel, right? And that's if you move the camera, people get nauseated, and think about the games where you don't move the camera. Driving games, right, first person shooters, it's like, platformers, so many times you're moving the camera. And what is so magical about mixed reality, which, for folks, the differentiation, when you've got pass-through video of the outside world, and then you augment that video on, augment on top of that video, you can do what people normally think of as augmented reality, but without the sort of tech limitations of actual augmented reality. Magic Leap, HoloLens, they have this tiny little field of view, so it wasn't very immersive. When you do mixed reality, it's your whole field of view. You've got 180 degrees of augmented landscape, and because you can now move your actual body around, that nausea problem goes away. And so, as an example, a basketball court, a soccer field, these are predictable, unimpeded formats of large open space. And you take a mixed reality headset and you put a kid in that, and now all of a sudden you have an environment that they can walk around and move their body through this whole ginormous space. Talk about a cool open world game. You are the character moving around in this open world game, and the number of opportunities from there are just awesome. And it's actually easier than developing for VR, because most games, you've got to animate the main character. You've got to build a skybox. In mixed reality, the world is the skybox. You are the main character, right? You just need to now animate a much smaller set of things, the objects they're going to interact with, the NPCs they might engage with. So it is, the time is so now for mixed reality. The Oculus Quest 3S is $300, adjusted for inflation. That's cheaper than the Nintendo Entertainment System was. So it's a really, really cool time for this space.
Oh, Alex, you're muted again.
Sorry, VR is such an interesting world, and I had my conversion moment recently. My reconversion moment actually demoing the Apple headset, because it literally has a dimmer where you put full screen, like you can't see anything outside of you, and you can dim it all the way until you can see completely through, and it's totally mixed. And I'm like, this really does feel like the future of VR. And everything is selected by eyesight. You look to click. It's incredible. And I've heard the Oculus is great, but I haven't tried it yet. So very excited about Immersive as well. Okay, so here's our speed round. I'm going to give you guys a little scenario, and I'm so curious to hear each of your answers. You are you're in a local bar, and you hear somebody talking next to you, and they run a game studio, and you go, oh, interesting. And you hear them talking, and they're talking about their game studio, and you realize you're in the same industry, and they come over and they say, oh, you work in educational games. We've never made an educational game. Why should we make an educational game? What is it worth it? Is it economically viable? What is the benefit of it? I'm so curious how you would answer that question in this age of AI, not just in general. Hey, education's important. It's impactful. Why now? Let me start with you, Skylar. Why should somebody make an educational game? And you can say they shouldn't if you want. I know that may be your answer.
I'm not going to say they shouldn't. I love educational games. I think, again, you're reaching a much larger audience, a much bigger audience. In fact, a game developer reached out to us last week to do a contest. They want to run a contest, promote creativity, promote, learning, which we loved. We're going to run this contest. The students are going to love it. And then think about the PR and the marketing for the gaming studio, right? Now they're showing parents, hey, this is not just a hobby. Like, they're going to be learning. One of the biggest missions for us is that we get away from button mashing, right? Like, think about your actions. And I think Game Class does that better than anyone else. You get these young, gamers, and sometimes they do these amazing things, but do they realize what they did, right? Now, with Game Class, we can point that out, we can highlight that, we can discuss it, we can talk about it in their clips, right? How many clips are out there? 3 billion video game clips just circulating? They can be used for education. We're wasting them. There's so much potential. So when they see how big that market is and that they're going to reach a much larger audience, I don't see how they don't invest into it in some capacity.
Yeah. Okay, great point. So huge market. Vadim, you mentioned earlier that you can be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, right? In an educational marketplace rather than competing on the App Store or on Steam. What would you say to this studio developer? Why should they do an educational game?
Well, I would say, first of all, there's a lot of orphaned educational games out there. So a lot of studios have spent, or very talented individuals have spent a lot of time, years of their life, building an educational game that never kind of sees the light of day. It doesn't end up in any classrooms. Maybe it's part of a research study, maybe it's in an academic setting, but it doesn't get the light of day. And that's because it ends up being too big and too expensive to actually sell into a school district and actually make money off of. So we sell to school districts, which means we kind of confront that reality for what they're willing to pay for, what they're willing to see. And they don't want to see one game. They want to see a curriculum that spans my K through 8 science, right? To supplement this textbook that I have. And if I come to you and I say, I have this amazing photosynthesis game, they're going to say, I don't care. Do you have the full curriculum or do you not? Right? And so the first question I would ask this game studio is, how are you going to distribute your educational game? Are you going to distribute it on Legends of Learning, in which case you better be prepared to make a 10 to 15 minute narrow game using Unity with our SDK? Or are you going to distribute it through Minecraft EDU? Are you going to distribute it through Roblox, their educational platform? Is it going to be on some other? Is it going to be on Skylar's platform? Is it going to be on Brent's platform? Whatever it is, make sure that you're putting in the right amount of effort for the right amount of revenue that you're going to come back, or else you're going to be building that amazing game that no one ends up seeing because it's just too expensive to distribute to a school district.
Really interesting. So yeah, partner with a distribution platform that knows what it's doing in the school world. I think that makes sense. And Brent, last word, what would you tell this game studio? Why education?
Yeah, I mean, I do love what Vadim said. You know, the output, the distribution, where it's going to go, the platform is so critical, and so and makes for a completely different game. You know, if you're on a Switch or your PC or whatever, But I think from a high level, what I would say to that game studio is, if they're not already in immersive, making games, that just to take a slice of it, take some of the assets and make a little mixed reality experience, a 10-20 minute experience. I put my 4-year-old in our mixed reality thing, and I couldn't get him out of the headset. I mean, he's running all around, and 4 is young, and I think that to even understand what's going on, and so there's a simplicity level for a developer who already has their assets to be able to push that out into a mixed reality environment that I think would be really powerful, and would be a way for them to sort of dip their toe in at a time when there's not a lot of content out there. The headset, as I said, is $300, and so they could kind of be able to make a big splash at a time when there's not a lot of competition. Alex,
Oh,
you're muted.
Alex, you're muted again.
Sorry, I keep doing that. Big audience, some established distribution partners, and not a lot of competition, but hopefully in the AI world, more and more and more competition as people jump in. You've already been doing that at Legends Learning. Thank you to this amazing panel. I'm running over time, so I'm just going to switch to our next incredible panel who's been waiting, but this has been awesome. Thank you all. I'm just going to do the little quick intros to them. I'm not going to ask them to introduce themselves. You can, the panelists here, I'm so sorry if I'm late here. As you introduce yourself, as you answer the first question, talk about what you do. So we have Nick Chen. He's an entrepreneur in residence at Karina Initiatives, which does incredibly interesting education work. He's also been thinking about gaming and education for a long time. He was at ST Math, one of the leaders in that space. Leisha Lee has created one of the most exciting platforms out there right now, Rosebud AI, for creating games in education and other environments. It's an amazing product, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Luis Gaetan is the lead developer at August Interactive, which makes games both for military and education purposes in really interesting ways. And Tanvi Vartak is an ambassador of Women in Games and has been studying how games can be used in all sorts of new contexts. Actually, slide back up for just 1 second. One thing I also want to highlight is Rosebud has done a very generous offer for the participants of this webinar. Just jump to the next slide, please, which is a promo code, a 1 month free of using Rosebud. I highly recommend it. Rosebud is I think it is one of the most mind-blowing, where you're like, oh wait, I can see where this could go. I can really see how teachers could create their own games in their classroom. It has amazing templates. You can choose what it's about. I highly recommend it. I think it gives a great vision of where this whole space is going. So write that down, Edtech 25. Okay, that's it. Let's jump in. And again, I didn't give you guys enough of an intro, but let's start. Leisha, let me start with you. We just talked about Rosebud. Rosebud has evolved dramatically. You've expanded a lot. Can you tell us what Rosebud AI does and what you're doing to try to normalize the idea of game-based learning and teachers as game designers?
Sure. Super excited to be here. I don't come from, I guess, an educational background, so I defer to everyone else to kind of on that front. But what we've built is basically, motivated by trying to bring in more creators and into gaming. So specifically, Rosebud lets you create games without having to be technical first. We are online now. You can access it directly at rosebud.ai. Don't have to download anything, and you can immediately start creating games. It's browser-based. We have obviously the AI side on the cloud doing inference, but it's basically that simple. Like, I can describe something like, Dune Minecraft, or create a RPG that has these themes, and you can kind of draw in some ideas from lesson plans and then instantly start generating code, which you don't have to understand, but then it starts rendering in the browser, and then you can iteratively start refining your game. I'm super excited about this because I think, as alluded to even in the previous panel, the pace at which code generation in particular is developing in AI is so fast that the thing that is the most kind of exciting for me is, like, how do you bring in more creators to take advantage of this? And for games specifically, it's like, we're such consumers of games, I think, as a society at large, but like, in order to kind of get people involved in creation, that's a big opportunity, both for education and to just get people doing more constructive things rather than being passive consumers. So I'm sure we'll get into more of these themes later, but as a quick intro, that's what we do. We do 3D and 2D games. It's really just, kind of magic, and I invite kind of everyone to test it out.
Definitely check it out. And so you mentioned this sort of making more creators, and I want to ask you, Nick. You've worked in game technologies for a long time. I think my instinct when I hear you say that, Alicia, is that young people who play games a lot, the idea of, hey, here's an AI text engine, make your own game, try it, see what you can do. I feel like maybe they'd jump in and say, let me see what this is, let me see what I could do. That's just my gut. But teachers who have been teaching in the classroom for a long time may be a little more hesitant, maybe a little more, hey, let me understand it. I'm a little nervous. Can I do it? Nick, I want to ask you, you've been working with schools and teachers for a long time with ST Math, with Epic, with your recent projects. What do you think are going to be the objections where teachers are going to be nervous about doing this type of game design, and how might we as a field support them, make them feel, hey, no, this should be game-based learning, really should and could be part of your world?
Yeah, I mean, I think most teachers are into the idea of learning by doing, right? And this kind of comes back to what you guys got into this a little bit in your last panel about this like game-based learning versus gamification. And that was my soapbox for many, many years of like game-based learning is where it's at. Like gamification, whatever, that's the chocolate covered broccoli, as I was in the chat. And like, I think there is some benefit to gamification. But to me, it's like my biggest question is always like, what is the student doing? Like, what is the core activity that they're doing? And that to me is like the gameplay. I have, we chatted about this. I have shifted away from this kind of nerdy academic, like game-based learning versus gamification thing. I mean, I think I've even heard you on your pod, like use the word gamify kind of loosely, right? It's like, it's kind of a nerdy academic distinction. And so I've shifted over to talking about play-based learning because I think it's more intuitive. I think it's much clearer that, hey, like it's learning through play. It's based in play. It also opens it up a little bit in terms of like a game like Minecraft. I remember when it came out, people were like, wait, what is this game? Like, what do you do in this game? Right. And like play is more like, okay, well, you could just be tinkering with something and just learning through experiential, like play with this thing and see what happens. So I think like emphasizing this learning by doing, emphasizing like this core experience of like what is the main thing that they're doing. I mean, like I said, yeah, there's some benefits to like, okay, they have to do this digital worksheet. So if we let them customize an avatar or play a soccer game, like in between, like, will they do it a little bit more? Sure. Like that works with my 5-year-old. But at the end of the day, what you really want is for them to be excited about the learning, right? To make like the good tasting broccoli, in that metaphor. So yeah, I think there's a framing piece. And I'll just throw out one more point, whereas I think a lot of the reticence to embrace educational games is because a lot of them suck. Like a lot of them are this like crappy gamification of like, I mean, there's so many math fact games that are just the gamification. And like, that's what a lot of teachers just think of when you're talking about it. So it's kind of like we have to get the shift. I mean, if you look at like the number of educational products and number of educational games and like student performance, right? Like we've kind of created this problem for ourselves because those gamification type games are so easy to make and there's a billion of them. And so that's what a lot of teachers think of. So I guess like to this crew, it's like, hey, let's stop doing that. Like, let's start focusing on the higher quality stuff. Unmute.
I'm not muting myself anymore. Sorry about that, everybody. So the last panel talked about that sort of gamified, templated learning, and you're right. I think that a lot of teachers have seen this totally, basically lowest common denominator version of educational gaming, and they don't think of themselves as being part of that. They think of it being these sites with lots of little games that do that, and you send kids there when there's a little bit of free time. Luis, you have an interesting take on this because you've been working in education with some immersive language gaming. You've been doing some really interesting work with the military, which I'd love you to mention. But also, you've mentioned how sometimes teachers are worried that they actually that games might teach things that they want to teach, or might teach things in a way that are different than the way they would teach it. So I'm curious if you could talk about that and how we might support them in not feeling that stress.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. I think one of the things that we've seen when building video games alongside teachers meaning having actual teachers in the design team making decisions with you, involving them in the design process, is that you realize that teachers, as the users, as the implementators of the game, that they're giving the game to their students, they still want to have a level of agency on the learning that is happening in the classroom and the learning that's happening in the games. And so I feel like sometimes we talk about educational games as, oh, this game can help you achieve this learning outcome. But a lot of the magic of teaching is being able to customize what's happening in the classroom, what's happening in the game. And so in talking with educators, a lot of them want to have that agency of deciding, okay, yeah, you're going to learn multiplication, but you're going to learn it in this environment that I'm crafting, or you're going to learn it in this scenario that I'm crafting. And, we've been working with educators creating this tool for language learning, to learn any language and to get people immersed into what language learning is and the cultural aspects of learning a language. And every time we talk to teachers, there are two things that they bring up. They love the game, they love the narrative, but there is always this but, and is one, assessment. How do I know that I'm learning, that my student is learning what the game says that is teaching them? Like, where is the proof of that? And two is, okay, well, I'm teaching the weather today. Can the game just be about the weather this week? And so that level of agency and control is still something that teachers want out of the games and the educational games that are doing. And the same goes for other audiences like the military or work with the military. They want specific things out of these educational games and these games that they love to play, that they're able to have an agency and control.
I think that need for agency and control is true for both students and educators. I think it's a really interesting point. When I look at platforms like Rosebud, I say, okay, I do think there is a world where that vision you just said could be true, where a teacher could say, we're learning about weather today, and the weather outside is 62 degrees and partially cloudy. Make me a game, and it'll make a game. I mean, Rosebud, I think, could probably do it today or some version of it, and it's coming. So in a world where teachers maybe are getting more and more of that customization and agency, I think they're going to become game designers more, but there still may be some hesitation. And Tanvi, I want to ask you a question here. We are in a world, I've noticed in my travels around gaming and learning that often it's a lot of men. A lot of the early adopters in classrooms are male teachers, which are pretty rare, but they're the ones who are often leaning into gaming, not across the board, but often. But 76% of K-12 teachers are female. And I'm really excited about a world where teachers can create games for their classroom, partially because I think that will mean women are creating games. Tell us about that. You think a lot about women in games. How might this change in tooling change who designs and creates games?
Hello. It's really nice to be here and listening to this very exciting panel. Let me start off there. I think the first most important part is when you give these tools to teachers, how easy do you make it for them? Because they are really passionate about teaching. So if you go and tell them that, this game is going to help your students be more excited, because there are so many aspects about child development that takes place in a game. And as you mentioned in James Paul McGee's book, he outlines more of that. So I think teachers as creators would also help inspire more women to play games, right, in classrooms, because it has a ripple effect. Seeing a teacher who creates games and gets you interested in designing your own games, and with tools like Rosebud AI, or there are many other tools as well that we heard about, that actually gives you the opportunity of being more experimental and also entering into spaces which are traditionally male dominated. There is a change over there, but there is still more excitement for us to move in that direction with that taking place.
Yeah, I agree. So let's think about what that future looks like, where the tools are easy to use, where they're accessible, and where teachers who understand their students, their interests, they obviously know the curriculum and what they're trying to teach. They truly have control. let's talk about how we as an ed tech industry can support teachers in making those games. So Alicia, I want to pass this back to you. Tell us about, you obviously, not obviously, but you have these templates of different sort of game types that are starting points that people can use as jumping off points. That's a big move. But tell us more about how you think as Rosebud about getting, people who have never thought of themselves as game designers, like teachers, to say, no, I'm really going to try to lean into this, make it really good, make it something I care about, make it something my students will really like, not just pull it off the shelf, but actually lean into it. How are you helping them make it fit their classroom needs, their particular teaching style?
Well, I think pretty simply, we improve the AI side basically every week. We're deploying every week. And one thing about the templates is it's there not because people need to start from them, but it's there because people sort of want to have an idea of what could be done. So, we're taking a lot of product instincts from, say, Canva, which has templates because, if you start from a blank canvas, it's kind of hard to create. But it's really just a starting off point. Right now, actually, on our site, the thing that's primarily emphasized is actually just the prompt bar. And underneath, you see all the games created. There's actually over 500,000 games created. And from any of those games, unless they're prohibiting remixing, you can remix. So every game created can be a template. And that's definitely very powerful because you can search and be like, hey, something educational based on, say, this part of history, emphasizing this type of gameplay, you'll probably be able to find it. But because the AI is getting so powerful and we've been improving it, you could literally start with that as a prompt and then be able to generate a game and iterate towards it. So I think the teachers are already feeling pretty empowered. And quite frankly, that's how they found us organically to begin with. I think teachers are looking for ways to develop games, and things like ChatGPT have kind of given them the confidence that like maybe they can program now. And so our platform is, of course, much more kind of specifically streamlined towards that. You don't need to know how to use an IDE. You can deploy in one click. We take care of all that for you. But I think because the AI tools are giving people more ambition, they're finding tools like us organically. But yeah, I think like because the AI is like getting better literally week by week, it's kind of a no-brainer for educators just to get started by diving in. And the templates only serve as like as a launching off point to get them to know, okay, this is actually possible on the platform. You can create 3D games. You can basically create anything based on, content in your classroom, and then you can get it out there.
Yeah, and I'm hearing you say there's also potential for a sort of community-based approach, almost like a teacher. I won't say it's teachers pay teachers because it may or may not be commercial, but like the idea of a teacher in Omaha makes an amazing game to teach, and then others all over the country adapt it, and they say, actually, but I need it for the Florida standards, or I need it for, or I need it to,
Exactly.
That's an exciting vision. Nick, let me pass it to you. The term vibe coding came up in the last panel. It was also a term that you used, and I've heard you think about. And I think it's, I'm not a coder, but I think my understanding of the sort of vibe coding is this idea of sort of leveling up, stepping out of the details, and starting to think more architecturally about what you're doing, specifically in coding. But I think it's a good metaphor for this AI moment, right? Instead of getting into the details and sort of being like, well, how am I going to get a great picture of to use in a game? You say, I'm not going to worry about that. What kind of game do I want? What would excite my kids? Let's co-design with an AI. Do you think there's a world coming soon where teachers can start to do that kind of vibe coding and not be intimidated by the technical needs of game design?
Yeah, I think we're getting there. I don't know if I want to put an exact timeline on it, but I mean, like Leisha's platform, I think the tag is vibe code games, right? So I mean, that's kind of the hot thing right now. It just goes back to the whole like, English is the hottest programming language type mentality. I do think that we're going to get to this place where you can tell an AI what kind of game that you want to build, give it your kids' names, give it their interests. This was certainly my vision, a couple years ago, and I've kind of, I think we weren't quite there yet at the time. But the first thing I'd say is like, yeah, go check out Rosebud because it's definitely fun to play with. Leisha, I'd love to see you take like education, like I want to see that platform just be like magic school for game, like just the education thing. But I'm a little, selfish for education, bigger market. But I'd also say that you can kind of just vibe code in an LLM. Like I'll post, I did find this link, like how to use Claude to make a game in 3 minutes kind of a thing. Um, Alex, I know we had talked about this, like, how technical do you have to be? I think it's kind of like for right now, like it depends, right? Like you might get lucky and it'll just do it perfectly. But I think as soon as something goes wrong, that's where like you might like a technical background might come in handy, because these LLMs, they'll hallucinate code the same way that they will with like, some silly picture or something like that. But I think like that's just been getting better and better. I mean, OpenAI just put out their new image generation and they fixed a lot of this stuff, right? So I remember when it was like LLMs came out and like they couldn't do math, and we were like, oh, these,
Right.
and then like the next day, like, oh, now they can, So
Yeah.
I mean, it just the pace of the stuff is incredible. Um, and I'd also throw out a product like Ludo, which helps you go from a vague idea to like a more fleshed out game requirement document. And like the game asset stuff, like that's really easy to do. I want a game that looks like this, that has these kind of characters, like give me all the look and feel and all that stuff. um and I just end by saying, like, I think the ripest near term most accessible thing is doing something like a remix, it's called, on Rosebud, where like you take an existing game
Yeah.
and you're like, hey, I want to mathify it this way. And that's where like you might want to have like a teaching background or some kind of ideas there. But I think that's probably the easiest place to start right now, is like take some existing code that kind of works and then like tweak it a little bit to make it more educational facing.
Yeah.
But I really do still believe in this dream of, you were kind of speaking to it earlier, and like that was literally what Game Changer was supposed to be, was like, hey, I want a game about like change anything into a game, and I think we're gonna get there pretty soon.
Yeah. I do too. I'm very, very excited about it. And that, um, Luis, I want to pass to you with a question that I appreciate everything you're saying, Nick. It's so interesting, and I love Game Changer. You put if you want to share, you should put the link in there. I know it's a little bit not happening, but it's a project that you've been working on. It's really, I think it's an interesting vision of gaming. So, Luis, you mentioned earlier something that stuck with me, which is this idea that when you co-design with teachers, there's a couple of things they want. They want to be able to customize and put their own fingerprints on it and really, tailor it to their needs. They also want to know if it's working. And we haven't talked about that part of things yet. And I think this has been a real black box in gaming and education for a long time. When teachers say, hey, everybody, you have 15 minutes, go to cool math games, or go to go to a flash game site, or go play on Brain Pop or something, it used to be Brain Pop. They're not looking for outcomes, right? They're looking for that to be this like free flow practice. They don't expect serious outcomes out of gaming. And I think that's actually, one of the problems with the perception of game-based learning. So question for you is, are we heading towards a world where that perception of like games engage students, but they don't actually teach, where that idea is starting to be, history?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, the defining moment of a lesson, right, is, did the student actually learn what they had to learn, right? Like I mean, we teachers spend hours planning our lessons, right? And they're constantly evolving. Hey, work in this way with this student. It didn't work in this way with this student. Well, let's tweak it, right? And so I think with AI tools that enable us to be creative as educators, it really allows us to rethink about how we assess things. And, I've been helping teachers in El Salvador, which is originally where I'm from, here in the US, and also in Japan, in teaching with AI tools, in using AI in their classrooms. And one emerging pattern that I keep seeing is that using an AI tool in the class eventually leads to the question of, what am I assessing? Okay, so if they can generate an essay with AI, what is the essay actually assessing? Is it assessing that they know how to apply a concept? Is it assessing that they know how to write? And so having these tools, I think it's a little bit freeing for us educators, because it gives us more options and more modalities that we can use in our classrooms to eventually lead to assessment. So that's one. The second thing is that I think that the assessment, it's a part that the educator can always be in control of, right? I think these AI tools, what I'm hoping is that it will enable teachers to lose a little bit of the fear of using AI or game-based learning enabled tools. And they start seeing the game not as the teacher, but the game or the play as part of their arsenal of tools that they can deploy at any moment to allow the learning goal to happen in their classroom, right? And I gotta give a shout out to Lisha. I actually, a personal example, like I used your platform last summer to teach my technology and education class for a week during the summer. And so I had to adapt. I had to think, okay, well, now I'm not analyzing whether the student knows how to use GameMaker. Now I'm analyzing how many ideas can the student throw to Rosebud AI, and are they actually mastering brainstorming? Are they actually mastering, creating one? And to seeing the progress in 1 year to where the Rosebud platform is now, it just makes me realize, wow, we're getting close. And last thing I will say, I've been coaching a history teacher wants to create a simulation. And literally a few months ago, I was like, hey, like you can't create the simulation you have in your head on ChatGPT. It will just be text. But with tools like Rosebud AI or even the ChatGPT 4.0 image generator that just dropped, like yesterday, now this history teacher can create this simulation live, right? And have it adapt, but always keeping in mind that, hey, even though this is being live and it's being created by an AI, I'm the teacher that is assessing whether the student is learning out of that, right? And keeping that agency within the educator, because we're the experts of the children that we serve.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think the role that games play in education it's always been sort of on the outside, sneaking in a little bit. And sometimes teachers have brought it in for engagement purposes. Sometimes people have brought it in this gamification way. And I think some early adopters or some really innovative educators have gone much deeper and said, how can game-based learning, play-based learning, to your point, Nick, really be part of the world? Because it builds student agency, it builds autonomy, it makes school feel, and it's collaborative, makes school feel like a totally different world. So Tanvi, I want to give you the last word here. And this is a broad question, but or maybe I will do this around the horn, but I'm going to start with you, which is that, I think we're at a moment right now with really cool tools like Rosebud AI, where you can take existing game frameworks and remix them, and a teacher can go in and say, make this about my content or for my grade level or my student interest. And that is a huge move. Do you think we made that even that is a step towards a world in which, really, really immersive, autonomous games that are the games that we really, that gamers love the most, are also accessible in that way, where it doesn't have to be as templated. It can be, somebody mentioned Myst, in the chat, where you can create a Myst-like world and game with a tool like Rosebud or others in the space.
Yeah, I think like what makes games with templates also fun is that you can change the outcome of the game and the entire experience of the game therefore changes. So when you look at like different content delivery as well, if you're teaching geography and a particular teacher wants to focus on like the human aspect of the geography, or a teacher wants to focus on the land and the topography and things like that, just having those larger systems together and then changing just the slight end of it would create a very personalized lesson plan for teachers. And I say this globally as well, because right now I'm in India and I also realize that the adoption for game-based learning in classrooms, we are especially at a scalable rate, is something that we have to really move towards, because you have digital inequality and a plethora of issues that we are dealing with. But having tools like this, and teachers will also be compelled to think as learning designers over here, not just like game designers, but thinking about what is the most effective way of delivering content and then putting that into a game. It has just become a very simplified process for them. So there is not a lot of cognitive capacity, cognitive overload, sorry. The last thing that I want to say is, just building on Nick's point, is games can also serve as a good tool for students to actually do project-based learning. And then you are not just assessing what is the content understanding, but also their relational skills that they develop, and which is very important for the real world, because play is a central part of social development of children and adolescents. And how can these be used as very rich environments to help them learn SEL skills better? That is a very interesting part in games, which I think only when the teacher being present in the classroom can facilitate those conversations, and and along with AI can have more personalized insights on what students need, what kind of improvement.
Mm-hmm. So Nick, let me pass that question to you as well. I think you were name checked there. Do you see a world in which, we're going from educational game templates and casual game templates to really big, like the kind of games that game nerds play, but educational, right? The Braid or that Demon Cancer, I'm getting that wrong, but totally different kinds of games in an educational context. Is it possible?
I think it's definitely possible. I think it's just really defining, coming back to like what is the learning outcome for the game. And if you're trying to teach something like fractions, I don't know that like Call of Duty is the right forum for, and so it depends. I think that, I'm very focused on like math and language and like core like K-12 education. But I think, something like Luis's product that's more in like the serious gaming and like these kind of simulations and whatever that, I think that like that's where that application is probably stronger. So I'm gonna kind of stay in my niche, like, kind of K-12 like core, Common Core standard type teaching.
Yep.
But I do think that there's a ton of applications as the tech gets better. It's just gonna like the options are just gonna open up.
Yeah. Luis, what about you? In 30 seconds, you think we're going to be able to get there? Really full, immersive, interesting games created by teachers to order.
Yeah, I think so, and I think teachers that are creating games have to love to play with these tools, right? And be very creative and explore as many tools as possible. I think some of the most creative educational lessons, educational products are really about to come out in the next 2 to 3 years, because we're going to have educators exploring these tools and being creative and really explore what lesson planning means now, creating generative AI tools to vibe code vibe, right?
Code, yeah.
Yeah, and to game vibe,
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Great. And then Lisa, you've been, you cited a lot as really on the forefront of this. I'm curious about how you're thinking about these templates and sort of balancing ease of use and low barrier to entry for non-game designers, and then, spectacular end results. How are you thinking about it?
Yeah, I think it's only with how powerful LLMs are today that you can get both. So there's ease of entry because all you need to do is describe what you want to get the first iteration. But we really pride ourselves in building a tool that's like teaching people, how to problem solve through creation. Because it's like creation is play here. That's the thing that was the unlock for us last year when we realized, hey, we're not trying to build Roblox. We're trying, like, how creators are engaging with our platform is as if the creation part is the addictive part. But that's fantastic. Like, we want creation over consumption, right? So people, once they get the first kind of glimmer of confidence because their first prompt at least created something, and they can deploy it really quick, then they want to build more. I think of it as Legos. You don't care that your first Legos house is like the most amazing looking thing in the world. You just care that you built it block by block. And it's the same thing with Rosebud. Teachers or students, any kind of creator, they start off, they don't have to be technical, they get something done, then they start kind of wanting to inspect the code. And this is why in our sort of prompt descriptions, we not only show you the code, we describe to you what's being done, and then we suggest different directions. You're like, hey, your game looks like it has this. Why don't you also try adding this and that? And so it's like it's an easy entry point, but there's a huge amount of progression that you can sort of assume. And this is why a lot of the people who've been using Rosebud for months, and it's so heartening to hear, Luis, by the way, that you've been using it since last year. But some people who've like started and they're not even technical like you guys are creating things that have over 100,000 lines of code. So we really do think you can have it all with an AI tool.
Yeah, so it's low floor, high ceiling.
Exactly.
Which is, I think, also true of video and audio. And I mean, the LLM world is starting to make it, you type whatever you think of, it does something pretty good. And then some people go, okay, I'm going to spend the next month doing nothing but this and make something,
precisely,
unbelievable. Thank you so much. I'm sorry we're running over a little bit, but you guys have been an amazing panel, and I think we're heading very quickly towards a world in which teachers and many other professionals can use gaming in their daily lives. I'm so pumped about it. And you should look up Luis's work on military. What's the name of the project?
It's called Gamers and Guardians, and we
Gamers and
have
Guardians.
an episode on Twitch tonight, so come watch us.
Fascinating use of serious gaming for good and in a really interesting way. All right. For our final panel, we are behind schedule, so I'm going to do the quick intros and jump right into the questions. This is Louisa Rosenheck. She has been at MIT and Harvard. She has been around her own play-based lab, really loves this stuff and knows more about it than almost anybody in the world. Also the former director of learning design at Kahoot and now does lots of consulting. Hannah Selina, who is the co-founder and chief product officer at Kinu, one of the most interesting gamified apps in the App Store, in my humble opinion. Monique Mehta, who's been working on social emotional learning in gaming, something that's come up a few times in this today, but we haven't talked about it directly, but really interesting collaborative gaming for social emotional learning. And Christian Silver just got out of New Zealand. Polymath just got a really a round of funding to basically expand their math-based game. Really interesting use of gamification. Welcome all of you to the panel. I'm going to stop sharing here and let's jump right in. Again, I'll ask you to give a little intro to yourself as you answer your first question, just to expand a little bit. So, Louisa, let's start with you. You were at Kahoot. Kahoot is now leveraging AI a lot for content creation. They allow teachers to upload documents, and then it'll automatically create a quiz or give a subject, and you can imagine that kind of support. This feels like the lowest hanging fruit of AI for content creation. Where do you think it should go next? Because there are many more transformative applications in AI. I'm curious how you think about it.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing this up. And indeed, I think that content creation in this type of format is a low-hanging fruit, but it's an important one. One of the kind of superpowers of Kahoot is that teachers can create their own Kahoots, for their own students and their own content areas. That is really powerful, and they do spend a lot of time doing it. So creating content for Kahoot quizzes is something that AI does really well. And so, of course, we should save teachers time in doing that. But it is, it's pretty straightforward. And like I said, it's something that AI does very well because there's so many examples, there's so many models of how it should be done. Like what makes a good question? What makes a good series of questions? So I think one thing to consider is that kind of content is, it really fits AI's strengths. But what we want to think about for, as has been mentioned, moving away from chocolate covered broccoli, moving away from gamification to deeper learning, it's really about the actions. What do you do in the game that builds future ready skills, that builds different kinds of thinking? And so creating those interactions or creating content for those interactions is going to be different. There aren't as many models out there for what is good content in that way. So I think AI will be able to help with that, but you have to be more specific in your instructions, prompts, and examples and models for it. And maybe there isn't enough kind of generated yet to help those AI models know what is deeper learning. Which I think just means that we have to get really specific in our instructions about what is deeper learning. And then that goes back to, well, who knows about that? It's the learning game designers, the learning scientists, the people with the pedagogy and learning theory focus. So they still have to be a really big part of creating these, but I do think AI can be, as we're all saying, can be a tool in that.
Yeah. So Christian, let me pass that to you. Polymath is, Louisa mentions that what are you actually doing in the game? And in Polymath, you're in a world. It's a open world game. You're moving around, doing projects, but math is part of the projects you're doing, and you're also answering questions. You have strong opinions, I think, reasonable, well-reasoned strong opinions about the role of learning designers versus AI in creating educational content. Tell us a little bit about what Polymath is first, because people probably have not heard of it yet, and how you use AI in the development of the game and the gamification.
Yeah, Polymath is pretty fresh, so most people haven't heard of it. But it's basically a very immersive math game that's based on the kind of games that kids are playing these days and trying to engage them more. So, you know, they'll look at it and they'll think Minecraft or Roblox, but it's imbued with lots of learning opportunities. I'll add that it's for elementary students and it's completely free for teachers as well. And we've got a bunch of teachers adopting it all over the world. So if you want to check it out, I've just got our website, polymath.how. It's great fun in a classroom, but also great fun at home. And yeah, so the question was, this notion of like AI in the loop, which is what I think of as like if a learner is playing the game and AI is somehow mediating that experience. You know, maybe it's generating the questions, maybe it's creating the characters, maybe it's acting as a tutor, as opposed to sort of like AI assisted creation, where us as the people making the game are using AI in some way to make that faster or easier. And to put it simply, there are just too many ways that it can go wrong with AI in the loop, especially with kids. It's without a human mediator, it is really easy for it to say stuff that is like just incorrect or confusing. And as you're literally teaching these people, right, they haven't got developed executive function. They don't know how to tell right from wrong. That's what we're trying to teach them. They can't apply the critical thinking that we do when we look at the response from AI to say like, oh, that's clearly a hallucination. That's clearly wrong. So they might believe these things, which is like quite troubling. So that's why, at least until the models get substantially better, we're using AI to basically make developing these experiences much easier. Because one thing that's really hard with making educational games and educational experiences is if you want to make something that's really nuanced, as opposed to just like heaps of flashcards, this chocolate-covered broccoli thing that that's been brought up, you need to spend a lot of time basically designing this thing, and that's a lot of effort. And AI makes it a lot easier. Another thing that AI makes easier is the curriculum content itself. Because basically breaking down a curriculum into understandable standards, again, that can be human mediated, but it's very, very time consuming to do.
Yes, so I think that's a great segue to you, Hannah, because Kinu has been very, I think, very proactive and very pioneering, frankly, in doing some of the exact things that Christian just mentioned, using AI behind the scenes to help expedite game development, help expedite curriculum breakdown, and just vastly expand what can be taught in an app like Kinu. But it also, you've used it in really interesting ways to actually test what types of engagement works with users, which is, relevant to the core topic we're talking about. Can you tell us first what Kinu is, second, how you use it for content creation, and then briefly just touch on how you're using AI to actually improve the core loop and of the product itself?
Yep, sounds great. All right, Kinu, mobile app where you can learn anything and remember everything. So it's pretty much like learning by rote, but on steroids, supported with really incredible science of learning. We try to do what we can with design in order to make that pleasurable. But it is a bit of a chocolate-covered broccoli. I'm not gonna lie. Like in a spectrum of like gaming companies to learning companies, we're closer to the learning, closer to broccoli than to chocolate. Yes, so we've been using AI for a long while. We are now actually developing some of the hardest content that we've ever developed. We're launching into law. So really hardcore legal examinations. So everything that we've learned developing content for this like very playful, fun, learn anything that you want app is actually very applicable. Yeah, I guess how we think about, where to put AI, where to put a human in the loop. We kind of think about like different steps. So first is what you put into the model, what are you asking for? So the query itself, the knowledge base. To what AI and which humans. And we found that having a diversity of AIs and diversity of humans really helps. Then what loop? So who goes where? How does the circle turn? And then finally, how many loops? So we actually realized that having more than one cycle of changing feeding into AI, again human, again feeding into AI. So then finally, once even the product is already done, then taking stock of that and feeding that right back into that first query. So it's a very complicated process, but actually, strangely, we found that with this complicated process, we're spending less time to develop really high quality content than we had before. And I think that right now, it's kind of funny because, there's like vibe coding is coming up. There's new video and game developing models, and they're kind of at this euphoria stage where everything is new and everything is fun. And on the kind of text development level, we came, we started very early, so 2 years ago to develop the content. When we started, nobody could tell it was AI. Everyone was very happy with the quality. And then over the last year and a half, everyone became absolute experts at detecting, sniffing out AI. So the expectation of quality really came up. So we're just kind of working towards this. And I really wonder to what an extent that's going, like that same cycle is going to repeat as well in these other aspects of things that we can now do with AI, which were just not possible before.
Yeah, it's I want to loop back on the gamification pieces as well, but I'll ask that in a future question. But yeah. I think you right off the bat, as soon as Gen AI dropped, Kinu folks were like, oh, we have been developing all this content by hand. Now we're going to do all sorts of clever processes to be able to, exponentially increase. And now the tools are getting there in a big way. You could generate thousands of questions, for example, with one query in Claude right now. And it keeps rising what game designers and educational game designers can do. Monique, I want to pass it to you because you take a very different take on this, and it's something that I think has come up a lot, right? In this call, in this webinar, you focus on developing social emotional skills specifically through multiplayer games, which are done in a classroom, usually in I think like a 10-minute sort of like intervention kind of thing. That's really interesting. Tell us about that model, why you decided to do that, and how you use AI.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I think one of the reasons why we started Tomo Club was that what skills would still be valuable? That was the question that we asked ourselves. And then we thought like human skills are not going anywhere. So your higher executive functioning, how do you talk to each other? How do you collaborate, resilience, grit, your emotional well-being? All those skills will still be around. They have been around for 100 years. They will be around for the next 100. And no matter what hard skills can be taken away, which is actually happening, that's what we're having a discussion about in terms of AI. The softer skills will still remain. So we wanted to teach that to kids. And learning by doing is the best way. So in a game, I can create a scenario where you're frustrated. So you have to do it in a turn-based game so that the kids have to collaborate. So there is no option not to actually hone your human skills. You have to have a conversation going at all periods of time. So we do that. And then I frustrate them. And then you do deliberate practice where you tell them, hey, now you are frustrated. This is how you deal with it. Or this is what you took a decision. This is called opportunity cost. You choose one over the other. Now you can relate it back to real life. So I think learning by doing and just tying all of those together works really, really well. And that's what we have been doing for the past 3 years now. And we're seeing great results. The schools that we work with have been very happy. Engagement is skyrocketed.
And you're using sort of the social experience as well as the embedding into the actual curriculum or into the classroom day as a core motivator, right?
Exactly. So also the games themselves are built from a very different standpoint. So they're games. So if Hannah was saying she's more towards broccoli, we are more towards game. So we are like our games is games. There is no denying the fact that we have actually built games, but our games are built in a very different manner. So we'll have a curriculum person, like a pedagogic person and a psychologist who comes on together and creates a curriculum design document on which a game is built. So if curriculum says that we want to teach frustration is something which I took, or I have to teach grit, how many times I'm going to take risk and how many times I'm going to get up. So that's something which the curriculum has decided that we're going to do, is then goes to a game designer who then has to think of different ways that the kids have to actually fail so that they still go ahead and try it again. So then the game is built in that manner. So we have taken a very different take on how the game should be built out.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, I think, one of the things I want to try to get to, and Louise, I'm going to pass it back to you for a moment here in this panel, is that it's come up again and again today about gamification, sort of points and badges, and that sort of layer of game-like mechanics on top of things, which is incredible. I mean, Duolingo is the most valuable edtech company in the world, and that's basically what they do. So it's not like this is not like incredibly powerful stuff psychologically, but versus the sort of more exploratory, immersive, collaborative style of gaming that you just named, Monique, where in a world where the data of what you're doing in a game, how you collaborate, actually becomes accessible. It becomes something that can be used, as learning, as teaching experiences. These feel like two very different visions of what gaming can be. And so, Lisa, I want to pass it to you to sort of help us look at them in comparison, right? Traditional gamification often relies on right, wrong answers and problem sets and stars and streaks and linear progression paths. Again, very powerfully psychologically, but not always what we sort of want. The sort of game community doesn't always want that kind of gaming. How might AI help us create more exploratory games, games that are more like what Monique just outlined?
Yeah, exactly. So the really important thing in designing games for deep learning and building future ready skills is really thinking about what's the problem space and the play space. So, how much agency, how much room for exploration is there in your game? Ultimately, is it like there's a few choices, but it's very prescribed path? Or is it really more open? Are there places to be creative and build or, work with other players? So like I can't emphasize enough, ultimately it comes down to the designer and the understanding what makes good learning. And AI is not going to do that automatically. But I definitely think there are ways that AI can help us build these kinds of more open spaces in games. For example, traditionally in games, if it's like a game that utilizes a dialogue tree to solve a problem or explore something, or NPCs in MMO style games, or coming up with quests and challenges in maybe a science-based game. I mean, all of these things up to now had to be written, had all content that had to be thought through and written ahead of time and put into the game. But I do think there is a good opportunity now that AI can either generate more variety of these kinds of things ahead of time, or even better, as long as we have put in place safeguards and transparency and trust that we're confident in to make it a safe space. But students are maybe not just picking from specific preset conversation options, right? They could ask an NPC anything. They could explore anything in a world, and based on some good prompt engineering, the game would respond hopefully in an authentic way without saying, "Oh, I didn't understand what you meant." It could it could feel like a character you could really get to know, interact with. Maybe that character is supporting you in certain ways, or presenting you with more context in for certain areas you want. So I definitely think that AI has the potential to create more kind of open spaces. And on that note, I also just want to point out, this has also come up a few times, learning through play-based learning. So another thing to really think about and keep in mind is the play spectrum, from completely open-ended tinkering kinds of play to guided play, where there's some space, maybe some direction, but there's no one right answer, and then all the way to more structured games. I don't think AI necessarily makes any one of those better, but as we talk about what you can do with AI and what your intentions are, I think it's helpful to think about those different kinds of play and what type of experience you're trying to create, and then how does AI help you do that?
I love the language you just used about totally open-ended play versus more guided play. I feel like that really puts a lens on exactly the types of gaming that's come up again and again in this conversation. Christian and Hannah, I want to throw it back to you two for a second because I hope it didn't sound like I was sort of saying one kind of gaming is better than the other. I don't believe that at all. In education, there's so much room for different types of game mechanics, and I feel like the guidance so for Kinu, for example, and Hannah, you can jump in on this. You literally could say, "What do I want to learn?" You have this enormous spectrum of different things, totally interest-based, and then you can go deeper and deeper in each section. It's very exploratory, yet also very gamified. When you're in there, everything is progress oriented. You have tested all these ways to keep people engaged and retained. Can you tell us a little bit about more how you try to balance those two things and maybe a little defense of the sort of gamification? They're both great ways to, and Kahoot, I mean, of course, is this too. Like they're both great ways to engage learners, but they're just so different.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll tell you a funny story. I'll share some interesting stats about this exploratory aspect of using Kinu. So yes, theoretically, you can go anywhere. You can explore anything, start in the middle, jump to a different thing. We looked at the data, and we have some of the best completion from beginning to end in the edtech industry. And we're like, that is not at all what we designed for. That is not how this is supposed to work. And then we actually started thinking about it a little bit more carefully. So well, it turns out that actually, progression from a logical place which is the beginning, to a logical place, which is the end, sometimes actually makes the most sense. But what we actually realized is that we are lacking personalization in a space that frustrates users a lot more than the lack of agency over where to go next. And that is the personalization of what's in a person's head. And I think that sometimes in like designing edtech experiences, we forget that people are not coming, completely blank into the equation. And when you think about gamification, getting challenge right is just critically important. So you want to engage people with just the right level of challenge. It doesn't feel too easy. It doesn't feel too hard. So we've been actually exploring a lot with that, and AI actually came really handy to us to complement like a super old school technique that we're using called IRT, which is like item response theory. If you're into edtech, education, you probably know what that is. But basically, it's just a bunch of stats. The cool thing with AI is that you can, instead of waiting for your 300 to 400 responses for a set of questions that judge which kind of question identifies the best student or an advanced student versus beginner student, you can ask AI to play that role, and it does fairly okay. It's more than 50-50. So it's actually a fantastic model. The second thing that where kind of AI came into our unexpected aid is playing with novelty. So when we, why do people enjoy this kind of exploratory mode is because everything is always new. Why is it difficult to keep motivated to actually, practice and repeat? Because you think you know it, like you have this illusion of, right? And we were really struggling. How do you make every question feel like you see it for the first time? And rephrasing, sure, that's just, that chocolate covered broccoli. But what we realized is context matters. So we started, instead of asking the same question as an isolated unit, we started showing combined questions. So questions about things that you know, but combined into one question where they're juxtaposed with different things. So like, let's say you're learning about like Genghis Khan and Napoleon in two completely different pathways. All of a sudden they get combined into this timeline where you have to figure out who was there first. Actually, Genghis Khan. But and then the second thing is where you have to pick, like, say, a definition of a few things that might sound similar, but actually they're from completely different domains. And this, we realized, really, really helps motivate and engage learners because it gives them this like curiosity factor and the right level of challenge while doing something that could otherwise, if not gamified, if you will, it would have felt awful. And AI is actually pretty decent at creating this kind of very simple relational knowledge graphs.
Yes.
So that's something that we're very excited with.
AI is amazing at synthesizing, different styles or different types of information into one thing. That's a really exciting direction, actually. That gets my wheels spinning as an instructional designer, because that is transfer, right? I mean, if you're asking people to take content they've already used and use it in a new context combined with content that they've also done, you're spiraling. There's a lot to say for that. So Christian, let me pass it to you, because you have a different take on this, but I think you also have done a really good job of baking in some of the classic gamification things. I think you have levels and coins, and it is very much of a game structure, but in a way that uses that doesn't feel, that feels new. It feels like something where students can get that guidance that can be really important. So I'd love to hear you talk about the sort of guided versus open exploratory pathways.
Yeah, absolutely. And like to yours and Hannah's points, like I don't think we have a one true, like it's not necessarily our take that it's better. It's just the approach that we're using, right? We're trying to rely on some more open world mechanics to feel more like a game. And the interesting thing about the spectrum of like going from like completely open play to like very, very linear, almost like a workbook where I just knock through the questions, is like openness is almost at odds with personalization, because you can do anything. So how can we guide you, right? Like to do the right thing. That's one thing. And also like specifically in the space that we're working in with kids, openness can be really quite overwhelming in that just like I can do anything, so I'm gonna do nothing. Because I don't know, like the amount of choice that I have is overwhelming here. So what helps with learners is guide rails, particular. So like to make an open world more engaging for our learners, and also to make a game world like personalized, we need to create situations, some sort of contrived situation. In our case, characters have problems that need solving, and what gets complicated quickly in the case of personalization, when the things that kids have available to them are based on the skills that they have, right? Let's just make a concrete example. Say I know addition as a learner, but I don't know multiplication. But the contrived situation that we've set up like requires you to go through multiplication. Like, what the heck do we do? So there's this massive like explosion of like different opportunities, like different sort of like contrived situations that we can make. And that's the kind of thing that I think AI could help with. And I'm spitballing a bit here. But basically, because there is just too many things for like a human to like possibly come up with, to me, that's the point where we can just make like an infinite amount of these sort of like situations that are completely tailored to the level of the student. What I would add is don't let AI decide what the level of the student is, because at the moment it's really not good at that. You've got to use more like traditional measuring techniques to figure out where a child's ability sits.
Yeah. I mean, when I hear you talk about it, it strikes me as, one of the things that as educational game designers have wrestled with for a long time, and I think people in this room would be familiar with that, is as you say, sort of contriving, creating these narratives around a learning objective that are both trying to be engaging and interesting to students, but also relevant to the learning objective, and also broad enough to be interesting to it. If it's about teenagers, let's make it about social media. If it's about fifth graders, let's make it about, girls, let's make it about princess. I mean, like, we have all these silly things that we've done for a long time as humans to try to sort of grab kids and get them interested in something, even though we don't know them. And we use all these stereotypes about how we do it. And I think, I've heard you said this, Hannah, about, personalizing to what's in their head and starting to use placement, or even just ask them questions. I mean, this is something LLMs are incredibly good at, right? You get to a game, you say, let's find out a little bit more about you. Let me ask you a bunch of questions, or you tell me how you like to learn, and I'm going to change everything you see after based on that. That's never been possible before. And Monique, what I want to ask you is, from a social emotional learning perspective and a collaborative perspective, and I know we're over time here. This will be the last question, then we'll do around the horn. We're people are being generous with their time, both our panelists and our audience here. Is, when you're thinking about creating these immersive scenario-based games, and you said they're more on the chocolate than broccoli side, you're trying to make them really fun and exciting, and they're embedded in a class. How are you using AI to help brainstorm the ideas for them? Do you foresee a future where they may be done dynamically and not by a game designer?
I I think there's a possibility that that can happen. We're looking at human level intelligence coming AGI, right? Like because I'm in Silicon Valley and that's a conversation that everyone keeps bringing it up. I think if that possibility is hit, we will be there. But the AI to be self-aware and know enough about what's happening on a social emotional learning front is still a possibility. I'm not denying it. We just use it in development like everyone else. We have helped so much to fast track whatever we are working on, from game design to development to art to direction to narrative, even curriculum design to a certain degree. But we still require humans to just go through everything that it does because we're working with kids and it's a very sensitive matter that you can't present everything which comes out of AI because we can differentiate what hallucination is or what's right, what's wrong. The AI can't. And the kids are still at the age where you don't want to give them everything which is there. But in future, I think what it can help, and something which we are seeing already signs of it, is that it can help in the lesson plan for teachers. So I think on the teacher front, where it's already an adult, where you have an optionality to choose what's right and wrong, and because we're also selling to schools and like ours is a classroom-based curriculum, so essentially on the teacher side, we can do a lot more with the AI versus on the student side. Because on teacher, I'm also hoping that there's agency and there's freedom that gives to them and they're more creative on that front. Something which Rosebud AI, like the previous panelist spoke about it. And I think that's where we can start testing things out rather than going directly and jumping, hey, this is what kids need. The kids are using AI is the most like the most used thing on a chat GPT is mental health. Like most teenagers and most kids are actually discussing mental health on ChatGPT. So we know that it's going to go there. If we don't put the right guardrails and right structure in place, it's just going to be in way worse than what it can be.
Yeah, and I think that ties back to Christian's point about, AI in the loop, or, at what point are we comfortable putting AI directly in front of students in different products, or even directly as the game designer? But I mean, often that means in front of students or in front of learners. Yeah, maybe it comes with AGI, or maybe it's just a level of AI that we're not at yet, or maybe never, right? Maybe everything should always have a human perspective when we're dealing with learners. Okay, so for our little around the room, around the horn final note here, you all have such interesting takes on how to create and maintain and improve your products. And Hannah, I want to kick this off with you because I want you to briefly because we're over time, but explain one of the things that you do that I think is so interesting, and I'd love to hear others think about this a little too, is AI as a way to improve engagement loops. So, we all know that everybody in educational gaming wrestles with how do we make the game both, engaging and retentive and something people want to play and competes with commercial games, but also learning. AI can actually help with the engagement loop. So Hannah, let me kick it to you to explain a little bit how you've used AI to sort of improve your engagement loops. And then I want to ask the rest of you how, if you had, a vast intelligence trying to get us to the next level of gamification, what might it look like, and how would you try to use it in your product? So Hannah, please.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, Alex, have I used AI to improve engagement loops?
Yes.
Also, tell me.
I know that because I interviewed one of your co-founders for a long time. Yeah, I mean, because you guys have tested so many different versions of the. Haven't you used, my understanding is you used AI to create and test different versions of the gamification systems to see which actual reward systems basically are most engaging. I mean, do I have that wrong?
Yeah. No, I that sounds really cool. So I will make sure that we haven't actually done it. No. What we've done, and this wasn't necessarily, we have tested AI as a means of improving engagement in the product. In fact, we've done like a lot of super interesting like engagement and retention work in the past few months. And actually, one of the key takeaways for me is like I now understand why it took Duolingo 1,000 experiments with retention to get engagement right. Because, and this is actually, one of the things that I would argue is the hardest to do with AI, because AI is, well, in my experience, great is like, you know, you ask it a question, it provides an answer. It's actually quite linear, right? With engagement, what we found, and that was the biggest finding of our research, was that the problem with those features is that, unlike learning features, which are kind of additive, so you add one learning method then another, so you know the learning efficiency increases by an additive amount. With retention, it was non-additive. So it was, you know, you can have something that has 5% impact, 2% impact, 1% impact. Together, they have a 20% impact. So actually, you know, if you are to test systems like that, it's actually very hard to model that with AI. One day, maybe we will be able to do it. What we have done is we tested the you know, using a chatbot, and we're actually pretty surprised that in our use case, in our specific use case, people were using it, but it wasn't actually improving retention as much as one can, you know, kind of think about it. It's like people do enjoy sometimes when it comes to learning, like following pre-existing, you know, closed world experiences, which to me was a really, honestly, quite a surprising insight. But yeah, I'll ask Chris. Maybe
Yeah, I thought, but
about
I mean,
something that we've done.
well, I think of, I mean, I think back of some of the most popular casual, you know, app games, and they are sometimes so linear. It's literally just like level 1, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, level 2, 2.2, and some of the, I mean, sometimes incredibly strict guardrails have a ton of motivational, you know, momentum if the core loop is there, and that, so is, but yeah, I maybe I misunderstood how Chris was talking about it, but I feel like AI could do a pretty good job of designing some of those experiments about, okay, we have 10 different things we want to test, let's put out every variation of the 10 and see which one all together it has different people, or to the point in the chat, how you have differentiated, you know, which works for which people. So let's go back around. So Louisa, let me ask you, you've done so much research and thought about this so much in play-based learning. You know, we have had to discover these gamification ideas about progress monitoring and leveling, and you know, it takes longer and longer to get to the next level for decades now. How might AI speed us up and get us to the next psychological principles and build engagement even more?
Yeah, so when I think about engagement in learning and in edtech, for me, it's really about that intrinsic motivation. And it's very much, I think, tied to personalization, but maybe not personalization in the way everyone thinks about it. So, you know, I really don't think that more content so that everyone has their own piece of content, I don't think that's the solution to personalization. I think it's really presenting an environment where players, students, learners can find meaning for themselves. They can do something authentic, something that matters to them, you know, within the environment that you've set up that is, you know, gives them an opportunity to build certain skills or explore certain content. Scratch is a great example of this. We don't say, here's the project you should do. Here's the project you should do. We say, here are all the things you could do. What matters to you? What are you excited about? And so I don't really think we need AI to conceive of those kinds of experiences, but I do think AI might be able to help in scaffolding some of that. You know, are you struggling with this? What are you interested in? Here's some suggestions, you know, as a thought partner in the creative process. And I hope we're going to see more and more of AI in assessing and helping students reflect on what they're learning. Oh, I noticed this took you a lot of tries. You did some really great iteration there. You know, those kinds of things are important skills and important components of playful learning. So that's really the kind of engagement that I hope we're going to see more and more of.
I love that. So that's like gamification. Oh, I'm using the word a little bit tongue in cheek here, but gamification through authenticity, gamification through purpose, through helping learners have autonomy. That's really exciting. And then AI can sort of play some role in that, but maybe it's not in the giving you a guided path necessarily. Nick, let me go to you. What do you think is the next round? What will we learn about engagement in the AI era that's beyond current gamification techniques?
I think one of the things which we've alluded to is the fact that curiosity kind of kicks in. So if what we can help on is if we can take a kid's curiosity, if kids excited about soccer, football, basketball, and take that as an example to explain, say, maths or to explain physics and different key points. Not everything can be explained through it, but just taking different levels of curiosity and building a personalized learning idea around that would work great. So I think learning will go into a more personalized standpoint. And even from my perspective, right, like human skills, when I'm discussing, every kid comes from a different background, different homes, and different contextual needs and cultural needs. So when you can personalize that according as an AI has a conversation, because the curiosity, I think just engaging into curiosity and getting kids to learn how to be a better learners is what it takes, because we don't really know what future is going to hold. Things are moving so fast. Like every 6 months, I think we have a very different discussion. Even you guys have like a completely different discussion. So things are changing so quickly that we are not sure. So I think the only thing that's constant is how do you learn quickly. So I think building onto that is where AI's next engagement loop is going to come in. I think it's already there, but I also see decision paralysis if you just leave it to them. So you have to ask two questions. Like generally, I think it's an old story where you give them two or three options to choose from, not more than that, and then you take it from there. So you have to give them starting guide rails and like things to build it on, and that's how you build that engagement loop up. So even when we start in our games, we generally give it to teachers to decide where the class is and where they stand in their human skill set level, and then from there we move it forward. Okay, this is what we need to do first, like, and that's where we go.
Yeah, I what you're saying about curiosity reminds me of Judy Willis, who's a great education researcher, and she talked about, hooks to build curiosity in learners at the beginning of classes. And the example she always gave was, teaching about volume. And if you really want to grab students, have a pitcher and a cup and start pouring the pitcher into the cup and talk about volume while you're doing it, and then let it pour over and pour all over your arm and all over the floor, and just get people to, and then tap into their curiosity and say, why is this happening? Like, it's funny, it's silly, it's unexpected, but also, wait a second, why is this happening? And I always thought that was really interesting. And I can see AI sort of being something that could create that kind of curiosity hook for any topic or for any type of learner. There's all sorts I love this curiosity, authenticity, purpose. It gets to much more of our sort of core, what makes us human. Christian, I'm going to give you the final word on this. What do you think is the future of gamification in the AI era?
What is the future? Oof. I mean, it's a pretty tough question. I think it's still so early in the game that we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But I think we will see just a lot more stuff. I think it's as we can see, like creating has become commoditized. And that can be like both a good thing and a bad thing, depending on what lens you have. Like there's going to be a lot of just like we've seen the proliferation of slop in sort of like the text generation space. I think we'll probably see a similar thing in the game space. So we're gonna have to be like, we'll have to deal with like a lot more bad stuff to get to the good stuff as like people who use these tools. But I think also on the flip side of there being more, there's going to be a lot more good stuff as
well. We'll have to walk through a lot of slop in the AI era to find good things, but I think this edtech ecosystem is going to try to expedite that and get right to some great, incredible learnings. The chat has been really rich. Luisa has amazing resources on this, as well as others panelists. So the recording will be sent out. I know we went way over here. The recording will be sent out soon in the next couple of days. Also, every panelist has recommended some really good resources, almost every panelist, to look into. So we will also be sending a pretty thorough set of resources about gaming, game-based learning, and some of the tools that are making this all possible. Thank you so much. This has been really fun. It's obviously a really hot topic. This is the 100 core people. We started at, I think, 350, and we still have 100 more, 2.5 hours later. I'm quite impressed. Thank you so much for being here. These panelists are amazing. And I to your point, Monique, I think we could do this same panel in 6 months, and we'd be talking about totally different things, which is incredible. I mean, what a time to be in this field. I hope everybody connects on LinkedIn, and we will be sending out everything here. And of course, if you don't already, please follow EdTech Insiders on all of these platforms and things. We're always trying to follow what is happening. I think we could do an interesting event about music in this world too. There's really interesting things happening in music generation, and video, of course. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to our panel, and thank you, Walker, for putting everything together. I will see you all soon, and look out for an email with all of the synopses and videos, and we'll try to make it digestible. Really appreciate you all being here with us for our EdTech Insiders event on AI and educational game development. See you soon.